All right, so welcome. My name is Tom Johnson. You may know me from my blog, I'dRatherBeWriting.com. I've got a lot of material about API documentation on my blog, and let me just point you to, I'll try not to stand in front of that. Let me point you to something on my site so you can get more information, and I'll explain how this course is organized. All right, so if you go to Courses, API Documentation, you can find all this information online. And the way the slides work is there's a number for each slide, like 1.0, 1.1. They correspond with more detail on my site here under the API course with this heading. Now, welcome. One thing you can't actually see here because it's this monitor doesn't scale. On the left-hand side, there's a table of contents. So if you want more information about any one of these things, you just expand this part and you can, well, I thought this would actually collapse. Looks like it's open. Anyway, expand this part and go to the section you want and you'll get more detail. So at some points in this course, I'll actually dive into one of these pages so that you can copy some code samples and use them. But I just wanted to let you be aware of that. A lot of people like this because if they're getting lost, they're like, what is he talking about? What's this curl stuff? I want more information. This is how you get it, okay? So I'dRatherBeWriting.com, courses, API documentation, and then look for the number in the header. And this is a brief outline of what we're going to do today. First, you're going to use an API kind of like a developer. Well, first we'll do an introduction to APIs. Then you'll use an API like a developer. Welcome. Or, no, hey, well, we just 2 minutes ago, we just kind of kicked things off. So yeah, now we've got another 3 people just joined us. That's great. We've got a full house now. We've got all the seats used, except for one. So, okay, this is our outline for today. We're going to go over an introduction to APIs, using an API like a developer, documenting an API, and then publishing API documentation. So each of these sections could take, I guess, an hour since we have 4 hours. But we'll take breaks, obviously. And I want this workshop to be as valuable to you as possible. So I want you to ask questions when you have them. Stop me if I'm not clear. I don't know. Whatever burning sort of things you want to get out of this, I want to know what they are. Because I'm happy to just completely abandon whatever plan I have and dive into something. So let me just ask right now, is there anything that you guys are hoping to get out of this course? Cherie, you said your boss wanted you to attend something. Is there some kind of problem you're trying to solve? Or I'm just kind of curious to get some initial feedback.
I've been to any workshop in the last couple of years. So
Okay. Okay.
I also just wanted to hear from you. I'm a big fan of your blog.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. All right. Anybody else? Is anybody trying to solve some kind of issue or problem?
Yes.
Jill.
Adding to my resume.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great one. So how do you kind of build your resume with API doc experience and know which jobs to kind of target? Great. Oh, we got one more person. Somebody let him in, and we've got one more chair for him.
I'm kind of similar, Tom.
Yeah?
I'm not trying to solve a problem, and I don't need this now. So but my next job, I'm wondering if this would be a nice niche if I went back into more of a pure technical writing, would be to concentrate on APIs. I've done a little bit in the past, and I liked it, but I'm kind of like, can you make a career out of that too?
Yeah, so you're thinking ahead
Yeah.
for the future and thinking maybe you want to make this your specialty, kind of, or kind of fit into it. Great. Welcome. We're just getting started, so you haven't missed anything. Anybody else? What are you trying to get out of this workshop? We got career stuff, future jobs, continuing education, trying to stay fresh. Anything else that you're really looking for? So this is great, and I love the topic of APIs. I'm actually excited to get the morning to spend to chat and discuss API documentation with you guys. My wife doesn't like to hear anything about APIs. As soon as I mention anything, she just goes like this, blah, 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 right? And this has been a favorite topic on my blog for the last year and a half or so. So I've written a lot about it, and it's a fun, exciting field that we're going to dive into here. All right, so for those of you who just walked in, the numbers here, thought this was a laser. Oh yeah, there we go. The numbers here correspond to my website. If you go to I'dRatherBeWriting.com, courses, API documentation, every title has a number for more information. So let's jump into API documentation and address this first point that somebody brought up about careers. You know, is this sort of a good career choice? How can I build my career? In a survey by Programmable Web, which is a site that tracks APIs, open web APIs, they surveyed 250 odd developers about what was the most important thing for them about APIs. And they rated at the very top complete and accurate documentation, more than anything else about the importance of an API. You know, some of these other things, service availability, active developer community, price, these are actually not as important as complete and accurate information, which is really, really encouraging, because this is our role, right? We want to provide complete and accurate documentation. There is a tremendous growth in APIs. This is another survey. Well, not really a survey. This is a chart that tracks the progress of APIs. And this ends in like 2013 at like 10,000 APIs. These are just APIs that are open and on the web. The number of private APIs that aren't on the web is many, many times this. But APIs are growing tremendously. Almost every company has an API. If you search for a company and then the word API, documentation or API, you usually find something. Because the web itself is becoming a mashup of services. Now when you want to build a website, you don't just go out and get some site like Drupal that has everything you want in it, a giant Swiss Army knife. You build a website and you grab a service from one company, you grab another service from another. This is a list of services for static websites, websites that don't have anything else. If you want a comment forum, you can go to Discuss. If you want e-commerce, if you want forms, if you want anything, payment, search, you can pull these features from different sites. And this is only kind of touching on web services for websites, right? There are lots of different sort of data services that are powered by APIs. Everything from financial data to weather information to sports, news, it's all delivered through APIs. The whole web is just like one API they're all interconnected. So, what exactly is an API? If you think of it like a cog, let me see if I can raise this up a little bit. Okay, yeah. I can't really raise it up very high without taking a while to do that. So an API is like, it's an interface between two different systems. So the API in this case would kind of be this cog here, and it's allowing two different systems to interact. You have one website and you have another service and you want the two to talk to each other. The API performs this, it delivers the information to it. And there are lots of different types of APIs. We're going to talk mostly about REST APIs, which fall under the category of web services. But there are many different types of APIs. There's Java APIs, C++ APIs, or hardware APIs. There are lots of different types of APIs. But by and large, what most APIs are nowadays are REST APIs. So that's what we'll focus on. Jill. Oh, Application Programming Interface. Thank you.
REST.
Oh, REST. Yeah, that's another acronym. Representational State Transfer. Doesn't have a whole lot of direct meaning, and I'll get into more of what actually it does mean. But basically, let me just go slow here. I'll get to that point. I took a workshop once with APIs with a guy who was very kind of a guru in APIs, and he liked to compare APIs to a calculator interface. Think of your little GUI calculator. You punch buttons and so forth, 2 + 2, and what is happening is behind the scenes, each of those buttons is connecting with some kind of function or some kind of algorithm, and it's going and doing something and returning data. And APIs are the same way, except for that with REST APIs, instead of just doing all this locally, it's going out to the web and getting a service. So when you build a software interface and you have buttons that do things, they're often connected to APIs underneath that go out and retrieve information and bring it back. So this is a huge direction in a lot of different software shops. I was checking out an opportunity at a security company, and their main effort that they were doing was they were building these software interfaces that were just connected to an API. So rather than having all the code locally, the company had an API and allowed different clients to build whatever interface they wanted, and then each of the buttons in the API would just hook up to different endpoints in the API to call for different information. So it's how a lot of interfaces and other things are made. All right. I think if I make this big, it turns black, so I'll switch back here in a minute. This is a standard sort of example of an API. You've got some kind of application here, some computer, and it can be in whatever language. It could be in Ruby, it could be in Java, anything. And you've got an API somewhere in the cloud, and that can also be any language you want. It doesn't really matter. There's a request that is sent across HTTP protocol up to the API, and a response that is returned. So the request often looks somewhat like this. Wow, that is really small. I'm trying to debate whether I try to back this up or not. Can you sort of read it or not? Okay. One person shook her head, and the next person to her is like, no. All right, so if you can't read this, follow along in 1.2. Oh, I want to point out one other thing. If you just want to follow along the slides, I have a link to them right here. So they're online, and you can also go that way. All right, so I'd rather be writing.com/files/API workshop slides. Okay, so let me back this up a tiny bit. Yeah, it probably doesn't do anything.
Worse.
Is it worse?
For the focus. Yeah.
All right. So you've got a request that's originating from an application, going up to an API. The API interprets the request, gets the information, and sends it back down. And the format that it usually sends it back down in is something called JSON, J-S-O-N. Or it could be XML. Those are the two main response formats. But the whole thing happens over HTTP. So you probably use this model every day and don't realize it. When you are on a website, you open up your browser, you fire up Chrome, you send a GET request through your browser by typing I'd rather be writing.com or whatever. It goes out to a server. The server receives the request and says, oh, this is a GET request for information on this page, and I'm going to return it through the same HTTP protocol. And in this case, the response is given in HTML, but it's sent back down to the browser. It is the exact same pattern, and that's why REST APIs are called web APIs. They follow the same request and response pattern of the web. So every time you use the internet, you're making GET requests on to different servers for information. It's essentially using a REST API. Let me just make a comment here. There's a lot more that can be said about REST APIs. Lots of different characteristics, and maybe I'll just highlight a couple of them. The representational state transfer comes into play here. every request that you make to the API is treated independently. It's not, the server is not really, it doesn't know you, and it's not like customizing things based on you. It just receives a request and returns a response based on parameters in that request. There was a previous protocol some years back called SOAP that was popular probably 5-10 years ago, and that's largely been replaced by REST because REST is more flexible, it's more lightweight, the response is in JSON, and ultimately it's an architectural style instead of a standard. With SOAP, it was an actual protocol, so the request had to be in a specific XML structure in an envelope with a specific way that you package the information. The server would read it and process it based on a specific protocol and return it. So the whole thing was XML. It was very verbose and didn't work so well in mobile scenarios or other scenarios where you wanted something more lightweight, but it was very exact. There was no deviation. REST is not a specific standard. It's just a style that has these same characteristics. And as a result, because it's a style, there's a lot of deviation from one REST API to another. And this is why the documentation tends to be more important in REST APIs, because there isn't an exact way of doing it from one API to the other. People have to read the documentation. So let's do a simple example. And this is where we're getting into this pretending to be a developer sort of scenario. For those of you that walked in late, I said the approach we're going to take is that first you're going to wear a developer hat and use an API kind of like they would. And then you're going to switch hats and be a technical writer and document part of an API. And then we'll talk about publishing. But this first one, you're trying to use an API like a developer. So let's say that you are developing a website. I really like biking. So one of the things that would be important to me if I went to a website is to know how windy it is, right? Because if it's really windy, it sucks, right? Unless you're going with the wind. So let's say you wanted to have a little widget on your site that would just basically say the speed, direction, and chill of the weather. How could you do that? Well, you could find a weather API and hook this up. So let's see this in action, how this sort of thing might work. Oops, that's not really where I wanted to go. Oh, it is. Okay, so I've got a little button here that's just going to go and make a call to a weather service and bring back the information right there. So behind the scenes, what's happening is that there's code that in the form of an endpoint, as we'll get into later, goes to this weather service, and it says, get me this information about the forecast. It delivers a whole big packet of information back, and then I parse out the parts that I want and display them here. So it's a really simple sort of example, but it gives you an idea of what we're after. So as developers here, this is going to be our scenario. You're going to try to create this sort of example. All right, so first thing I want you to do is go and explore the weather APIs. Okay, we're going to find our weather API that's going to work for us. And there's one that I have in mind, but go to this site right here. This is mashape.com. Sorry, market.mashape.com. Just go to that in general. Market.mashape.com. And I want you to get a sense of the many different types of APIs that are available here. Now, usually, at this point, the Wi-Fi in whatever place I'm at crashes because everybody starts using it at once. So hopefully that won't happen.
I think that's what's happening.
It works. The Wi-Fi, it always works great when you're like testing it by yourself, and then it's like, then it crashes. Anyway, hopefully it'll recover. So you can see this. Now this marketplace is just like a marketplace or a directory of very simple APIs developers can publish their API here. People can check them out. But they're all really simplistic, at least the ones I've seen. But it serves our purposes here because we're just looking at some bare bones of an API. So there's everything from, so if you go up here, if you were to search for weather, for example, you would find lots of different ones. Let's see what we've got. We've got Yeah, we might not be able to really browse this in the time I thought. There we go. So you've got weather by IP, weather, simple weather, weather and forecasts, all this stuff. Lots of people, I mean, it's a very popular sort of thing because nobody has their own meteorological service, right? Except unless you're the weather company of some kind. So you need an API to go out and get this information. All right, so there's lots of different ones. If you browse this, there's so many different categories and other people just creating different APIs. Anyway, the API that I want you to check out is this one right here. This is a pretty simple one, FYHAO. And you can see some basic facts about the API here. Let's see if yeah. Now, this API has 3 endpoints. Get AQI, right? Whatever that stands for, Air Quality Index. Get weather data. So these are all GET requests, which is something we'll get into later. It has a brief information about what the endpoint is and the parameters for the endpoint. It has information about headers that you'll need. And it seems to allow you to test it, although I don't think that actually works. Actually, I think it does work, but not with the parameters that are the default ones. Over here on the right, which you would normally see in a monitor with more resolution, you have a sample endpoint definition. You have a request sample, sample response, and a body response. So these are the different parts of an API that, at least with the reference topics, are something that you would document. But in our case, remember, we're trying to create a website that's going to give us information about the weather. So our first sort of task would be to say, will this API have the information I need? Will it return the information I need? This endpoint, weather, is only going to give us the weather forecast in short label, right? And you can tell this person probably doesn't speak English as their first language because I have no idea what short label is. And in fact, I think this developer is from Singapore. But yeah, but you get the idea, right? Short string. Now, this isn't a great example of like a well-documented API, but it's a very simple API and it serves our purpose as well. This next one, get weather data. Get weather forecast by latitude and longitude. Right, so this one, you want to know what's the sample response. You can look through the sample response here and see that, in fact, there is information about the wind. So this would help us it would be useful to use this sort of endpoint. Okay, what I want you to do, what we're going to do first, we're going to make some calls to this API. So we are going to, you already made this get AQI one. This is the test I had you do before to make sure you had curl installed. But now we're gonna do a test of this weather data one. But rather than using curl for this first example, I'm gonna have you use something called Postman. So if you have Postman installed, open it up. If you don't, just try to install it really, really quickly. It's not a hard, it's a small file size.
On your list?
Yeah, it's on my list. But if you don't have it, just search Google Postman Chrome app. Postman Chrome app. This is by far the most common, most common REST GUI client. So it comes in 2 flavors now. One's a Chrome app, which I guess leverages Chrome, the Chrome browser for everything. And the other is a Mac app. So if you're a Mac user, you can also do that. All right, so download this if you haven't. Raise your hand if you don't have it. Let me just know. 3, 4 people.
I'm not finding it. I put everything on the list, but it's not showing up as an installed app.
Okay, so if you've already installed it and you can't find it, you need to, well, let me remember. On a Mac, it's Command Spacebar, and you can search across applications.
So it's a Chrome add-in though, right?
Yeah, it's kind of hidden for some reason on the Chrome add-in. It's not going to be easily.
If you get a new tab, then it will.
Okay.
You just press the apps button in the upper left corner that has a button that says apps on the toolbar.
Yeah, I think if you go to Chrome://apps, it should appear there. All right, so go ahead and if you haven't downloaded it, try to download it now.
How do you get to the weather? So I'm at the market.
Okay, you're going to go to,
Yeah.
you're going to search for weather by FYHAO. You go to market.mashape.com, and then in the search APIs box, yeah. All right, now to speed things up, instead of having you sign up for an API key, I'm just going to send you one. So let me just send that to you right now. Or actually, I'll tell you where to go to it. Okay, so, whoa. All right, you're going to need this. So while you're downloading Postman and getting that open or finding it, go to another site, and this will speed things up. Go to learnapidoc.com/apikeys.txt and copy that Mashape key, that first Mashape key. So normally what I would have you do is sign up at Mashape and get your own API key, but that usually takes an extra like 5-10 minutes. Okay.
I got signed up just now.
Okay, well if you're signed up, great. If you're signed up, what you want to do is to get your own API key, click Explore APIs. And then, wait, I don't think I'm logged in. I can't see my whole screen. There we go. Let me remember how I get that. So, okay. Applications, default application, get the keys. Application. So if you are actually signed into Mashape and you want to get your own API key, you would click the Applications button here, and then choose Default Application, and then you'll see this button that says Get the Keys, and you can just copy this testing key if you want. Right? Otherwise, you can get the API key from here. learnapidoc.com/apikeys.txt. So what this API key is going to do is authorize you to make a call to this API, right? Because they want to track you, they want to track the number of calls, they want to be able to prevent malicious users, have some control, and eventually some of these APIs they're monetized. So with APIs that would cost money, you could actually be charged for a certain number of calls, requests per day. Maybe you have 750 requests or something free, and then beyond that it charges. Anyway, you need an API key for almost any kind of API use. So once you have the API key, open Postman, and here's what you're going to do. In a new tab, or actually I'll just do this tab. No, I'll do a new one. You're going to paste the request for, let me go back to it. Paste the request for the weather data into the main area. So this request here, the endpoint is listed here, endpoint definition. So copy this endpoint, right? Open up Postman. And I'm going to get into these in more detail later. I just want you to have some context so that once we get into them, you'll have a sense of what we're doing. So you're gonna paste it in here. Click headers, right? And for the header, you're going to type for the key x-mashape key. All right, for the value, grab the key. Sorry, paste it in there.
You display that path to the text file again.
Yeah. It's learnapidoc.com/apikeys.txt. Okay. So the API also specifies that in the header, you need to tell it what kind of format you'll accept. It actually doesn't say that explicitly. You just have to infer it from the sample request. But you're going to type, okay, let me go back here. Another one under header, accept.
I'm getting way behind you.
Yes, so I'm
You'll
just
catch
trying
up.
to-
You'll catch up.
I don't have anything.
Okay.
I can't get that.
understand.
All right.
I'm not able to get the first.
Okay. We'll slow down. I know. I'm leaving you guys behind. Let's see. Tell me if you've got Postman open. Raise your hand if you've got Postman open. So only one.
I got it.
Okay. So you don't have Postman open?
Close, yeah.
No. Okay. You want to go to. Do you have it? Do you have it downloaded?
It's on the- I thought I did.
All right. Yeah, you've got it open.
Okay, yeah, just somehow.
Okay. You don't have it open, Postman? So open a new browser and type Chrome://apps. If you can go directly to that, like as a path, that's easier. But apps, yeah. See if that goes to it. Can you just go directly to that? Like copy that URL and paste that into path. Chrome//app or Chrome:// Sorry, go back. You want to go to Chrome://apps. Get rid of the google.com part. Yeah, you're almost there. No need for .com. No need for .com. Just Chrome://apps. There you go. Okay, so this. Oh, you got it misspelled. You're almost there. Okay, so paste that in your URL address bar. What you need an E, CHROME.
And one colon, right?
Yeah, 1 colon.
Okay, so after
So,
Paste, copy.
well, I don't think he copied it actually. So copy this from there. No, not that. Just right there.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just a way to get to your apps in Chrome. Unfortunately, for some reason, this one is hard to find. And this is just a shortcut. Okay. All right.
Is that where it want to be?
Wow.
What the heck?
Now I'm flabbergasted. How do you search for programs in your machine?
I just got this laptop.
All right. Try typing Postman down there. Maybe it'll be easier. Have you already installed it?
I thought I did, yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't
I don't
show
think-
up anywhere in the OS. It's buried inside of Chrome.
All right. Did you type it down there? I don't think I saw you typing it. Post. All right. Why don't you try one more thing? Just try searching for it. Try searching for it, and it'll go to it, and it'll say that you've already added it. So try searching for Postman.
And is there anywhere where it says to show?
Okay. Yeah. Click that.
Just use the plugin, don't use the app. And that seems to work for me.
Okay.
I don't know how to do it. Like,
All right. And then, yeah, click that. I don't think maybe you didn't have it.
Because I went through the initial.
Sorry. It's I'm not really sure why it's hidden from you, but let that install, and I'll come back.
And it's,
Yeah, but I don't
this is
get,
Postman.
I don't get the same interface when I start posting.
All right, you've got Postman, you've got Postman. All right. Who else doesn't have Postman?
That's it.
Right there.
That's it, yeah.
So now you're gonna go to the other website, copy the get,
The other
put it
website.
to there, and then you need to also go to the website and grab the key. Otherwise you'll get it off it.
The other website being?
get that in there, it's gonna ask you to
Mesh, shade.
Oh, Mesh,
No,
okay.
I don't.
Hold on.
the option.
And then,
Okay. Wonder if we have a. Do we have access to a whiteboard? A whiteboard. I think there's one back here. All right. This.
Let me see. No.
Yeah, I think I got this. Don't worry about it. I'm good.
Oh, okay, cool.
See, I get it right here.
Go back to Postman.
After this.
Yeah, now see, this is what I have to do. Hit this. Oh, yeah, that's what worked before. Drop this in here. Get with it. Okay. I had that before. LearnAPI.com.
are those keys, they're not case sensitive, are they? Accept headers and,
I don't believe so, but if you're not getting a response, then make them case sensitive.
that's what I did.
LearnAPI.com/API
So-
keys. What's the rest of that URL?
txt.txt.
TXT.
Yep.
Okay.
Do you know if there's any whiteboard markers anywhere? There should be something. I just need one.
It should be the simple weather.
Yeah,
Thank you, Greg.
sure.
Okay, so once you're in there, once you're in Postman, you want to paste in the endpoint here in this main box, right? Select get, and no, nothing. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. So.
Here, but anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, where did you get? Did you get into Postman?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
into this, but it's just, I don't know what to do after this.
Okay, I'm going to walk you through this part.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so I'm going to go back through this more slowly. On the MassShape site, you're going to click the Get Weather Data endpoint. Look on the right for the endpoint and copy this. Okay, we're all there. We're all there. Copy this weather data endpoint. Go back to your Postman and paste it right here in this main box in the middle. Oops. Make sure it's only the HTTPS. And then click the headers tab here, and you're going to type x-mashape-key, paste in the key, and accept an application/JSON. So get to that point. We'll make sure everybody's to that point, and then we'll keep going. And the key, if I had a whiteboard marker, I would write that learnapi.com/apikeys.txt there. But I cannot find it. I tell you, as soon as we start to do a hands-on activity, it's like
So we're in headers, though.
it goes everywhere. But This is one of the most important activities. I wouldn't spend time on this if I didn't think this was like the most important one.
So where to get that key again?
Okay, so
Is it one of the-
yep, if you go to learnapidoc.com/API keys.txt, there's a first one right there under mass shape.
You don't have it.
Just copy the key value. Now you're going to paste the key on this side.
Okay.
You want to type x-massshape-key on the left.
Okay, I'll just look at it.
Yeah, if you look at the screen there, x-massshape-key. Whenever you're working with an API, you usually want to do a lot of tests with the different endpoints, right? And most people use a GUI client like Postman to do these tests. So this is why it's important to like be familiar with Postman or something equivalent, because you want to be able to make the calls and get the responses yourself. All right, where are we at right now? Is everybody to this point? Okay, there's one more thing. We've got to add some parameters to our endpoint. So click the params button. And if you look back at the at this endpoint, you can see that it has two parameters, lat and long, LNG. So what parameters do is they configure what you want from the API back. They configure the endpoint. And we're going to dive into each of these sections in depth here in a minute, but I just want you to have some exposure to what's going on. So you click params, and for the key, you're going to type LNG, and another key, LAT. Now for the value, we're going to do Sacramento. Okay, so if you go to Google Maps, Sacramento.
We're way behind you again.
Yes.
We have URL params, which I guess is the same thing, but click that and I get nothing.
You get nothing.
Send,
You
preview,
click params.
yeah, this guy here. Click it.
There you go. So now you've got. Oh, I can't really see.
This is what I've entered.
And you're supposed to enter
Wait,
what happened? Where did you click?
I don't know. Just
Where did you click to make it
I
go
clicked
away?
get
Yeah. So you,
URL params again.
wait, scroll down a little bit. I mean,
Yeah, so it appeared here for a second, and then before I could type anything, it rolled back up. And the send here doesn't work now.
this is let's see. This is extension one instead of the app one, the Chrome app one. So I'm not as familiar with this one. So we click this. Click that guy right there. What's that say? The new version? What's that? Yeah, why don't you get that one?
Okay. Now this is
And
still
then
embedded
add
in
to Chrome.
It's still.
But
totally inside
there's
Chrome.
actually like I don't know what, it's confusing. There's a Chrome extension. Yeah, add app. Okay. All right, and hopefully that will be.
Yeah.
Okay, now double click that guy. Oh yeah.
Moving satellites, aren't they?
So. Give that a sec. Tell me when that's loaded. We'll get there. Did that open yet? Is it still?
It wants to sign into a Google account here, so.
What? It shouldn't ask that.
Think I can skip it?
Yeah, skip that.
I'd just be closing it.
If you click that, yeah, launch app. The green button right there. This thing again?
Well, at least it's got a different text screen up there.
Okay, well that's going. Let me just. So if you are up to this point with the parameters, you have to configure a latitude and a longitude. So if you go to Google Maps and you search for a city, only some cities are supported, but Sacramento is one of them. So right after the address in Google Chrome, you have a latitude and a longitude value. So you copy those and paste them in so that it looks like this. So I actually have these reversed, but the order doesn't matter. Latitude is 38.5. LNG is negative 121.5. Right? So when you paste those in, you've now configured everything. You've got parameters, a header, and if you click send, it will go out and get it and retrieve it. Choose JSON there.
The negative value is actually the long, is that what you said?
Why isn't that working?
Lost everything I had entered before. Extension. I know, but I mean, I can't, it's gone. It was here. At least we got this.
Oh, you still can't find Postman?
I thought I downloaded it.
But I gotta go back here.
Okay, so.
Can I just type it real quick? Let me just see if I can get it.
I downloaded it the other night, but why isn't it?
Oh wait, is this? This is Chrome. Why does
Oh,
it
no,
do
it's
that?
not, you know what? It's,
Is it because it's Bing?
that's what I was thinking.
That's weird though. I thought the Chrome browser would just allow you to.
What the heck?
And when you search here, it's like. Nothing. And when we search, hold on. Postman app, Chrome. And even when you go here.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The next key will be
Postman Chrome. Sometimes it'll say launch app from here.
Okay, I'll get that. Thank you. Yeah. LAT is the 38.
Yeah, LAT.
Wow.
What?
Wi-Fi kills us. It
Include the minus.
Yeah, include the minus for the light.
all right.
With the longitude.
Yeah, that's
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Stop with that.
Wow. To download Chrome. Oh, what browser is this?
This is,
Oh.
I thought I had.
Oh, there we go. I was wondering why that wasn't working. Whoops, sorry. I mean, take over your thing. So, you know what? This is actually like the extension. What you want is the app. It's
Okay,
a subtle
okay.
difference, and I'm not really sure why there's.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
so come to this guy,
Okay.
add to Chrome. Um,
Ah, okay. I didn't get that before.
yeah, because it's a Chrome app, I think it only works in Chrome, and that was our problem. I thought you were in Chrome, but
I thought
it
it
was
was
like
too.
it's like it was in the background or something right next to the browser. It was confusing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and this should launch here in a minute.
I'll tell you, X, uppercase S, dash, M-A,
I was feeling so confident because I got through all of your pre-workshop instructions, so I was.
Don't worry,
That
this-
was my.
Okay, now it launches. Okay, so
Aha.
we're up here. I don't know if you have the mash shape stuff still open. Do you happen to have that open or not?
I think I do.
Just go straight to the app.
Yeah, gotcha.
if it shows up, that's good. I don't mind.
Okay, so
Yeah, just click on
now
the thing.
let's see what's the mash shape stuff over here.
I did.
At first I had a different, was it case?
Whether
The
I
value,
don't know, maybe it doesn't know that well.
let's see if it finds it real quick.
Should I give it the right camera?
Let's just actually take this over to the other browser. Oh, those must be to download Chrome.
the key is that you have,
Okay,
EF,
no,
so
don't,
we stay here.
no.
you cannot type it.
Yeah, but I thought maybe it would autofill, it offered
No,
autofill.
this is where you get this.
Oh, back here,
Yeah,
okay.
it's the website where you.
I had that at one point.
Yeah. The e-learning,
Yeah.
you were struggling
And
with.
I want to tell you
Yeah.
that, so I was talking to some other guys in my office
Yeah,
who do
Great.
our software.
yeah.
They wanted to come, but they were saying, well, can he just come to our company? And
Oh,
come
really?
up?" And he said, yeah, because I think my whole team needs to know this.
Ooh, okay,
Wow, well, that's cool.
And
Okay,
thank you.
but aren't you leaving your company?
I am.
So okay, hold on. Let's get this through. So we paste the endpoint right here. Okay,
Okay,
this
okay.
is that. Now the header, you've got two. One is x dash. Whoops, I'm not typing in there. X dash
The save button so I don't lose it.
mash shape dash key. Right, so we're gonna get that from
Yeah.
this other site here called Learn API doc.com/API key.
Save the collection, that came.
Okay,
Aha, aha.
copy this. All right, I got it. I already copied it. Okay, we're gonna paste that into. Okay, paste that into there. This one, application.
So these
Sorry.
are the headers?
Yeah, these are headers. So I'm going to get into all this stuff, but
Okay,
basically, this is telling you what the format is that we're going to accept. All right, now you got to also configure the parameters on this. There's two of them, LAT,
Oops.
LAT, and LNG. And actually, let me just go to the other one.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because it's not on your computer, it's basically just a web browser. Yeah, yes. If it's
It
right.
was,
It's like, it's okay if you don't,
Yeah, I got here, but it
when
was.
you get complex.
so you want to type for these two parameters? Can you type the numbers you see there? Lat, 38 point whatever. Okay, now hit send. Cannot get any response. Oh wait, we got word get right here. Sorry, I didn't paste that correctly. Now I'll try it. Okay. I think it's because I've been making too many requests with the same API key, but that's right. Okay, where are we at? Has everybody put in the parameters, the header? I think too many people are making requests with the same API key because it's coming back query count 0, which is not what was happening earlier when I was trying this. But is anybody actually getting a real response? You two in the back were? Okay. All right, so did you use your own API key or did you use the sample? Yeah. I'm not really sure why it doesn't like more. Admittedly, this API is kind of flaky, and so. But this is the way you do it. Okay, so we are going to keep going. I just wanted to expose you to Postman because it tends to be very useful. Now, the way that most people work with Postman is once you make your request, you can save it, and then you would open it up in this left column here, and you can save them. Let me show you a sample from another one.
You could save this request.
Yeah, you could save it, and then you could run it at another time.
When I hit save request, I get a request name that goes on it.
Yeah, so you'd add a friendly name.
Okay.
And
Sacramento.
yeah, and then you can add it to a collection, so you can group your requests, let's say under Mashape or something. But in a lot of the API doc jobs I've had, a lot of the developers love using Postman, and other people do too. It's not the only available app. There's lots of GUI apps. There's one called PA on a Mac, which is really nice looking, and it works really well too. But it costs $30. And if you just search for REST GUI client app, you'll find many. But the idea is basically that it gives you an interface to insert all this, and you can quickly make updates, you can change parameters, and do different things. You can also toggle the response type. So down here, you can toggle it from JSON to HTML and other things like that. So you can change how it's rendered if those options are available. Okay, any questions, thoughts? Sherry.
I also just want to mention, Postman just came out with a run button that I haven't tried it.
Oh,
yet,
yeah.
but, I guess theoretically we can include a run
Yeah.
API doc. So
That is a great point. Yeah, I actually saw that on Programmable Web. Let me point to this article. I think I can find it easily. Let's see. All right, never mind. There we go. Run in Postman button is now live for 10 public APIs. So this is huge because you wanna allow your users to experiment with the API that they have. And other tools like Swagger, which is something we'll talk about, allow people to make calls directly in the app and explore it. But you can also now put a Postman button in your API docs, and when they click that, it's going to basically open up Postman, I believe, and populate it with all the different settings you would need to run through the API calls, I believe. I haven't explored it yet, but this would be like a Swagger replacement, and something that ultimately is probably more useful than Swagger because it gives a more control, flexibility for people to have all those requests right at their hands. So yeah, good point. Where did you hear about that, by the way? Just curious.
one of our API development mentions.
Okay, yeah. I would definitely try that out and pursue that. Okay, let's keep cranking away here. Now you have submitted your request through Postman, but this is just one tool for submitting requests. There's another one, called curl, which is what I had you install. And curl is the command line, right? So you're going to get even more techie here, but hopefully this one will not be. You're not going to run into the same errors, hopefully. I mean, with Postman, it takes a bit of getting used to the interface, figuring out where things are and stuff. But curl is all from the command line. So curl is a way for you to interact with websites and get information from the command line. You could actually just get your website and all the HTML from curl if you wanted to. For example, open up a terminal. Let me clear this. If you don't know how to open a terminal on Windows, I believe you can just search for it or click CMD or type CMD. On a Mac, you can also just do Spotlight, Command, Spacebar, Terminal. But if you were to type, I'll help you in just one sec. If you were to type curl at ratheryourwriting.com, it's going and getting the whole website. So it's a way to interact with different web resources. Yes? Do you have? No, good. Okay. Yeah, you're fine. Was that your question? Yeah. That is the terminal. Okay, so if we look back on the MassShape Weather API example, you'll see that the request example is actually given in curl, because it's a universal way to make requests. You don't require people to have Postman. You don't require people to have anything really except for curl on their computers. But if you copy this, and let's see if we can bring this out. Blow it up a bit. You can see there are different, whoops. You can see there are different components to it. First you have the word curl, which basically tells the command line you're using curl. Then you have different parameters. The first one here is a get. There are different ways that you can interact with the API, and get is just reading the data. The include parameter means you want to include the response header. So every time you make a request and get a response, you not only get stuff in the body, you get metadata sort of information in a header, and you can include that. This is our endpoint that we're submitting to with the parameters. The parameters appear after the question mark in what's called the query string. This H means that we're including some information in a request header. So in the same way in the Postman GUI where you typed headers and you entered X MassShape key in the key, accept, and the data type that you're willing to accept back, you enter them like this. So these other breaks right here, this backslash is just a line break. It's not needed. So the way you work with this is you just copy this in to curl you would copy this into your command line and hit return, and as long as you have curl, it will get it. Now, these default values for the latitude and longitude aren't going to work. So we're going to replace those. Now, I'm going to show you a shortcut to replacing those. In Postman, go back to your sample. There's a nifty little button over here on the right called Generate Code. And you can take and generate your request in any other format you want, including curl. So you can just copy what you've already entered and paste it into your terminal, and it should give you the same response. Yeah, so sorry.
Where's generate code at?
So it's on the on the right in Postman right here. And it's actually quite powerful. Let's say you didn't want curl, you wanted JavaScript so that you could make a query on your page. It actually gives you the code snippet to run that. So if you were to paste this inside of some script tags on your page, it would actually work. And some websites, they show you like lots of sample code for these requests, and it's all auto-generated by and large. So it's very simplistic, and you can do it all through Postman. Anyway, with Postman, the curl one also happens to have some stuff about a cache control and a Postman token. Those are, you can delete those. I believe, I'm not actually sure why Postman injects that, to be honest, but it's not part of what's needed. So go ahead and, in Postman, go to generate code, choose curl, copy this, paste it into your command line, and see if you get a response.
What's the generate code button look like?
It actually just, it's not really a button, it just says generate code right there.
Whoa.
Did you copy that to clipboard?
Yeah, copy that and make, well, choose curl in the drop-down menu and copy it to your clipboard. I believe, I think you got to actually select it first. I don't know. You can either just highlight it or click that. Open up your command line and paste it in. And tell me if you get any response back at all.
Could not resolve host.
I'm especially curious if the Windows users get any response.
I'm still getting null, but I actually had problems with the cert, and so I had to add an insecure option, and then it returns null, kind of like you would get in
Okay.
Postman.
So when you,
These guys, they rule the day.
you're actually getting,
First couple people win something.
maybe I should have had everybody just sign up for their own API key. Maybe that
And that was
would
on
be easy.
Mashape somewhere?
Yeah, mass shape. If you look, yeah. Yeah.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, so let's learn a little bit more about curl, because you'll probably find that your default code sample, you're going to have to choose something. And curl is often like a main contender for the code sample because it's techy, it speaks to developers, but it tells you everything that you need to know. Like, it tells you that you've got header values, you've got a certain post method, and things like that. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. We already kind of walked through this. I mentioned that there's different abbreviations. So if you were to actually read through the curl user guide, there are lots of different commands and parameters you can add, but these are the most common. -I or -- or -- include is going to include what's called the response header. So every time, let's see if we can do a quick sample here. Every time you make a request to a website, you're used to just seeing what comes back in the body. But if you were to just see what comes back, hold on one second. Okay, so here I've selected to only see what comes back in the header of the request. And I did that by typing I as a parameter, -I. Means I only want the response header. So every time you make a request to a website, it's also telling you all this stuff, like who can access this page, what content type is on the page, where the server is, the date, all this stuff. You just don't see this, right, when you're browsing different sites. But you can specify in curl that, yeah, you want that included because sometimes it contains important information. Sometimes API information is actually included in there. Another parameter, D. Whoops. Sometimes when you're using another type of request, you're not just reading information, but you're actually creating information. You'll use what's called a post request. And when you create information, you usually need to supply some data. Well, by using this D tag, this D command, you can specify what data you want in your request. The H stands for header. So you remember how in Postman you were including header information in the request that included your API key and some other details? You do that through -H. And then this last one is the method. All right, we're going to get into methods in more detail, but it's essentially read what's the CRUD acronym, right? Create, read, update, delete, right? But in HTTP, you've got get for read, post for create, put for update, and delete for delete. So here, the -x, and then in full caps, the method name, is how you would specify what method you're using with the endpoint. All right, so curl is fun, and you probably will use it as you document APIs. Let's see if some of our API tech writers use curl at all. Cherie, do you use curl?
I do because I mentioned the run button earlier.
Yeah.
Currently we use runscope, and runscope actually runs curl commands.
Okay.
So that's the only place I use curl.
Okay. And run scope, that's kind of like
It's similar to Postman. It's a REST client.
all right. It's like a REST client. Okay. I've heard of it, and I actually talked with a tech writer once who works there, and she told me that like a lot of companies use it to do power testing of their APIs, like do a lot of endpoint testing and monitoring or something. All right. Okay. We're not going to spend too much more time with curl, but like I said, each of these sections has a lot more detail on my website. So if you want to dive into curl, definitely see more of that. There's a lot of stuff in curl that's completely unrelated to REST API calls. So these parameters that I pointed out right here are pretty common ones to know. All right, let's see if any of this is sinking in. What does the little I mean? Okay, yeah, include response headers, right? What is the big H? Yeah, you're specifying the header in your request. What does -x post mean? Right, and how about the D? Data, the data that you're posting. Okay, good. Wow, awesome. All right, so there is an API that is very helpful actually in playing around and testing things. And it's actually the pet store API that the Swagger people developed. But we're just going to use it as an API that is stable and easy to use to play around with some of these curl commands that are more than just reading. All right, so what I need you to do is you're actually going to open up on my website 1.9. So if you go to, let's see what page that's going to be. 1.9, using methods with curl, we're going to use the pet store API to make a few curl calls. Okay, so we'll get into pet store later when we talk about Swagger, but for now we're just going to hijack their API and use the curl, or use some curl commands with it. So this first activity, I want you to create a pet. So go to this site, go to this page on my website, and you're going to copy. Now this is going to be using curl in a little more advanced way, right? Because you're creating something, not just reading it. So this is I'dRatherBeWriting.com/doc APIs_curl_with_pet store, or 1.9. Open up. Okay, copy this little code snippet here and paste it into a text editor. Oh man, okay, sorry, I'm just thinking how this is going to go wrong. Okay. All right, well, let me just make sure everybody's with me. Are you at this page? You're at this page right here. Okay. Anybody not at this page? Okay.
I'm getting there.
Oh, it's slow? Okay, you're going to copy this page. Copy this little snippet, because this is the data that you need to post in order to create this pet. Right? This is an API that will for sure work, because it doesn't require any authorization. It's just a play with a sandbox API. Okay, so copy that and change two things. Change the ID here to something really unique, like 7 or 8 digits that nobody else is going to have. Okay. And change the name Fluffy to your own name with Pet or something. Tom Pet. Something that is going to be unique that you'll recognize. Here's the tricky part, okay? Save this in a place where you're going to be able to find it from your terminal. So I'm going to save this. I really like a certain folder on my computer. I'm going to call this, what did I say to call this? Whoops. mypet.json. Okay, so save it as mypet.json. Now, if you can save it under your username in your directory, it will make it a lot easier, because right now in Windows, for example, if you were to type pwd for present working directory, it tells you where you are. And you can navigate around to try to find it, but you're going to need to go to the same directory where you saved that file. So go ahead, if you're in Windows or Mac, type pwd present working directory. It tells you where you are on the command line. And I saved my pet.json file in my projects directory. So whatever directory pops up there, it'll make your life easiest if you just save that file in the same directory. Okay, so go ahead and do that. Change your pet name, change your pet ID. All right, now back on my page here, copy this little code snippet in step 5. This is the API's curl command, right? It's going to look like this. You can see here that we're making a post request, so we're actually creating a resource. You're creating a pet here. The header tells us that the content type that we'll accept as a response is JSON. So it's saying, look, the only kind of format I'm taking as a response from you is JSON. And we're telling it what format we're sending it into JSON. Oh, sorry, I had those switched around. We're specifying the format of our request and the format of our response. Now this D is saying, here's the data that I'm posting. And because we're not going to just post our JSON here, you could minify this and then you could insert it here. But it's much more common, and this is especially a common scenario in corporations where you're posting a bunch of information to configure systems like this. Use the @ symbol and refer to the file. All right, and then you're going to send it to here. So paste this into your command line and see if you get a response. You can see here I did get a response. So it created a pet, and the name is tom-pet, and there it is. Right? Now we could unminify this if we go to something like JSON pretty print. What? What does it mean? Well, it's just minified, so it's compressed. So let's uncompress it here. Didn't like something. Whoops, copied too much. So this is the unminified version, right? So it's created a new pet. So go ahead and do that and tell me when you've finished. Raise your hand when you've finished, just so I know. Hey, we have success early. Great. I should bring a system of cups, like red and green cups or something, so that I know when people are done and who needs help. But try that out. So
Nothing but errors.
you're getting errors? Okay, let me help 1 sec. Did you get it? Oh.
No. We're both having trouble getting curl to not run. If you just don't listen, I can.
You know what? The curl setup on Windows takes a while, and so we'll just skip it for now. But if you have Postman, you could paste it into Postman and do it as well. If you go to the Import tab, if you have, and then choose raw text, paste raw text, paste that curl sample there, and it will populate it all within there too. But
So is like the Postman kind of a similar tool to curl?
yeah, it's the same thing. One's a command line, one's a graphical user interface. So, but yeah, I guess it's just more common to kind of give samples in curl because it doesn't depend on any specific tool besides this utility. And in Mac computers, it's installed by default, so it's like, I don't know, it's just more hassle on Windows to get it up and running. That's why I put this as a pre-workshop like thing, because it can take a while. But you might already have it. You can type curl and see if you get anything back. No, you didn't get anything?
Just the
Okay.
stuff I tried to execute.
Okay.
I installed it for, you got the command line.
You do?
Well,
Are we going to do that or some other step?
I downloaded it.
Yeah.
What command line are you using?
This is a command prompt. I just changed color.
Oh, just the same one. Okay.
Easier to anyway.
Because there's another command prompt that a lot of people use. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's something like
Maybe, yeah.
not Moby, but something Mobax. I don't know. I can't remember what it is, but it's more Unix-like. Do you guys have success? Success with the command line in curl? Okay. Some people in the back. All right. So when I worked at one company, basically the JSON that you had to submit was several pages long, almost, because you were configuring an entire system this way. So this is why I'm actually highlighting this example, is because your company may have you configure an entire system using JSON, and you want to maybe use curl. You're going to have to store it in a file and do it like that. If we were to take this same minified JSON, if we were to take the same curl call and replace mypet.json with minified JSON, it would work as well. Put quotes around it. But then it's harder to modify, because usually when you're testing stuff, you want to change parameters and see what the result is, right? And if it's all minified, it's just hard to work with. So that's why it's easier in the file structure. And you can save that file, and you can change it, and you can have lots of different files. And testers will write groovy scripts that like burn through lots of different test scenarios with different data files stored. Okay, but now as if you wanted to dive more into this, you could do some other activities here. Whoops, that's not where we are. For example, you could update your pet. You could delete your pet, right? So you can work with other commands, and we won't go into this more here, but I just want to point it out. Right. Any questions, thoughts, concerns?
Is there can we check that our pet? I mean, it seems like it got created, but is there a way on your website you can just browse that or there?
Yeah. Well, didn't you get a response back? Did you get a response back that had JSON in it? If you get the response back, yeah. If I wanted to test it, can actually, we'll get into this later, but yeah, I could do the get, or this pet store is actually what Swagger uses behind their interface. So if I wanted to get your pet, well, not your pet status, fine. Do you remember your pet's ID?
1, 2, 3, 777, 1, 2, 3.
Your pet is Milo?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so you created your pet. So this is the Swagger interface, and we're going to jump into this later, but not quite yet. All right. I just want to talk briefly about the JSON. These are things that you'll need to know when you're working with any kind of API. Like, how do you read the response? Most responses now are in this format called JavaScript object notation. JSON, and it's essentially key value pairs. So you have something that starts in an object or braces. I really wish I had a marker. Maybe. Did they say they have any or not? They don't? That's crazy. Okay. All right. Well, let me see if I can just zoom in a bit on this. No. Okay. Well, if you're following along, it's 2.0 on the slides. Basically, JSON is just a series of key value pairs. You have your key on the left in quotes and your value on the right in quotes. There's two types of formats in JSON, or two types of things in JSON. One is an object, and the other is an array. The object is enclosed with curly braces. So here we have, and the other type is an array, which is enclosed in brackets. So here we have an array, which is a simple list of things. Right? So you identify an array by the bracket, and the object by the brace. And you can have things that are combinations of these. You can have an array that contains an object for each list item. Right, so you're going to get back all kinds of responses, and as a developer, you would need to know how to access the different values that you want. And sorry, this is just one more example. So here's we've got an object, children, and its contents is an array. Let me see where I'm going here. Yeah, I'm going to just jump past a certain part. You access parts of the response. Remember how we wanted to pull out just the wind for that response from the weather forecast? Well, you need to use something called dot notation in JavaScript to access the specific value that you want. And so let's say that you have something like data.query.results.channel.item.description. What this is doing is getting an object within an object within an object and so forth to arrive at it. So I'm just going to show something on the board there that demonstrates this. If I go to my desktop, I've got this weather data. Oh man, it's not responding. Okay, oh, it did come. Okay, it finally came. So this is the weather data from our API that we're playing with. And there's something called logging the response to the console that's really helpful. I've opened up my JavaScript console. If you go to View, Developer, JavaScript console, you can log things to this. And here we've actually logged the object. So in the previous example, we had curl and we got back that minified JSON. Well, you can actually log that to the console here, and this allows you to investigate it, as I think it's called. You can expand the different objects within here. And you can see this this example here is simply printing out part of this response. I can't remember, probably this part somewhere down here. But you can access any part of this through the console. Anyway, I just wanted to point this out. We're not going to do anything with it, but it's a very simple command, console.log, and then you put the name of the object in there, and basically when you retrieve something on a web page, you get all this information below, and this is a very common way that you can investigate things.
How do you get to that console in Windows?
It should be the same because it's Chrome, View, Developer, Console from your View menu.
No View menu.
Yeah, you must have a newer version of.
It's under more tools.
Yeah,
More
that's
tools?
right.
Okay.
Developer tools, right? And yeah. More tools.
Okay. More tools.
It's definitely something you want to be aware of. Like, let me just spend a little more time on that because you're asking about it. Whoops. Okay. So let's make a request. For example, let's just go to my website. If you make a request, there's some things that are very helpful in this console. If you go to the Network tab, you can actually see all the things that get downloaded on your request. So when I make a request to this specific site, the server is actually making a bunch of GET requests to all of these different assets on the page. Fonts, images, style sheets. You can see all this stuff download. But it would also include any kind of API calls that you're making there. Anyway, just keep that in mind. You'll definitely want to play with the JavaScript console, the developer console in Chrome, and other browsers have them as well when you're kind of playing around with APIs. I guess I didn't have that much to say about that. Okay, we're going to jump a little bit ahead. Okay.
Lunch should be arriving soon.
Okay.
That's what came to my mind.
Well, will we know when lunch arrives? Will somebody knock on the door?
Oh no, I'll go out and get it.
Okay. So now that you've been sort of acting as a developer, you've been making requests from the command line, from Postman, you've been kind of looking at the response. Now I want you to switch hats and pretend to be a technical writer assigned to maybe this MashShape team. Maybe they say, look, we've got a new endpoint we want you to document. And so we need you to give us some documentation. So let's say that this endpoint that they're adding to this MashShape API is something that tells you the surf report. They say, look, we don't have any Joes here, right? Say, look, Joe, we've got this new endpoint in this new release called the surf report, and we need you to provide documentation for it. How do you go about it? Well, there are standard sections that are going to be included in every in every reference topic in API documentation that you need to be aware of and just check off the list. We're going to dive into each of these sections. These are what you'll need to document. The resource description. This is basically what kind of resource you're accessing. The endpoint. This is how you access it. Methods, parameters, request submission example, a sample response, status and error codes, and maybe code samples. All right, so in this, this first section, we're going to go through each of these. The resource. This term varies pretty widely. Like, not everybody calls it a resource. People call it everything from endpoints themselves to methods, like API methods, your call, your object, service, request. But I like the term resource because you're really getting some kind of information back. In this case, a surf report. What kind of information do you think we would get? How high the waves are, whether it's good conditions, thumbs up, thumbs down. You're getting some sort of information. So that core set of information is the resource that we're accessing. Let's look at a couple of examples from different APIs. So let's look at MailChimp. Let me close out some of these others. MailChimp and Twitter and Instagram. So in MailChimp, emails here is describing the resource. All right, some kind of automation workflow regarding emails. And the resource tends to be a short description. Here it's just one line. With Twitter, all right, for this resource, they have just a brief 2-sentence description or 1-sentence description of what you're getting. You're getting the most recent retweets. With Instagram, that's some kind of note that I've never seen before. But here they just have a brief description of the resource. And they call them different things. Here they don't even have the term resource. They're just endpoints, and they describe each endpoint. So the terminology varies, but essentially you describe what it is what kind of information you're getting back. Now, some people just refer to each resource as an endpoint, but this actually gets somewhat confusing because you could have one resource that is accessed through different endpoints. The endpoint is just the URL that you submit to the server that returns that information. Like when you did the AQI or the weather endpoint, you were submitting that to get information. But the resource you were getting was weather information. It was independent of kind of the way you accessed it. So I think it can get confusing if you don't have a way to distinguish between a resource and the different ways that you access the resource. Because here's an example. When I worked at a company that did gamification, we had endpoints that looked like this. A rewards endpoint, a user's endpoint, and it kind of worked like this. If you went to /users, you could get a list of all the users. /users/user ID, you would get just a specific user. /rewards, you get all rewards, but /rewards/reward ID, you would get a specific reward. If you went to users/user ID/rewards, you would get all the rewards for a specific user. And if you went to users/user ID, rewards/reward ID, you would get a specific reward for a specific user. So when you want to refer to these things, when you say the rewards resource, it's somewhat general because you can access that rewards resource through a variety of endpoints. This endpoint, returns a certain type of reward information. This returns another type of information about the reward. So there's logic in being able to distinguish different ways to access your resource. And anyway, so I'm going to jump past a couple of these things. Another part that you'll need to document is the endpoint definition and the method. So the endpoint is the URL that you use to get that resource. And the same URL can have different methods that you can use with it. You could use the post method with it, the get method, the delete method. And I think I have some examples here. Let me see. Yeah. Let's look at two examples. Box API and LinkedIn. So all right, this is a great example, and this is why I'm bringing this up. Here you have they say that you have a folders object, and look at all these different endpoints and methods that you can use to interact with that folders object. You can get the folders info, you can create a folder, update a folder, delete a folder. So these are all different endpoints and methods that you would use with this. And a lot of times when people specify the method, they'll just put it as like a label. There's not a whole lot to say. I mean, in your description, you're basically describing what the endpoint does. Let's look at this LinkedIn one. Here, basically they, well, wait. Okay, so they provide the endpoint definition here and the method. So you start out with the resource and the description, and then you add an endpoint definition here, or endpoint URL, and the method. All right? So it's not too unlike what we were doing with the mash ape. Okay, let me see. All right, the terminology for the endpoint also varies. Some people call it requests, API method, URLs, So the syntax and the terminology with API documentation is kind of non-standard. It's whatever you choose to make it. Questions? Okay. In your endpoints, sometimes you will have parameters in them. So with our fictitious surf report endpoint, let's say that the people, the developers say, look, you've got to pass in a specific beach ID in your endpoint. So a lot of times you'll have something here like campaign ID. You put this parameter, which would be called an endpoint parameter, right in You can put it in parentheses. You can color code it. You can put it in full caps. I've even seen like colons before them. You want to do something to set it off so that people don't mistakenly type it in just like they see it, but you communicate that it's a parameter of some kind. Curly braces tends to work pretty well. Okay, now every endpoint has a list of parameters that you can pass to the endpoint. And you put these parameters, hold on, there we go. You put these parameters after a question mark in the endpoint. This is called the query string. So here we have the endpoint, and here's the query string. The order of each parameter in the query string doesn't matter. You could do days first or time first, whatever parameters you have. But it's important for people to know what are the allowed values for each of the parameters. There's 4 kind of data types that are common. A string, an integer, Boolean, and an object. A string is just a word. An integer is a whole number. A Boolean is true or false. And an object is some kind of key value pair. So when you're documenting the parameters for each endpoint, you want to clarify the data type as well as describe what the parameters are, note max or min values if those apply, and maybe provide some samples. Sometimes you pass the parameter not in the URL in the query string, but as in the body of the request. So we did this when you created a pet, when you had that whole big JSON block. That was passing a request in the body parameter. And when you submit parameters in the body, invariably it's in JSON, in key value pairs like this. Okay, let's see. You also need to document a sample request. So remember in the mash shape example, there was a sample curl request, and it showed you how you could call the API. Well, you want to provide the same thing in each endpoint, and you can do that sample request in curl or some other example. Let me see if I think I've got some examples here. No. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around here. Did they go out and get food? Is that what they got? I believe they did. Okay. In the sample requests, as much as possible, you want to make it work. This is a bad example for that mash shape one where the sample values actually don't return anything. So you want to allow people to copy and paste something and then just have it work. Usually they'll have to populate it with their own API key, but if you have the ability to somehow like dynamically populate the API key based on their own profile and login, great. Another component is the response. Here's a response from an API called Flatter or something. I'm not really sure, but here they list also the response header in addition to the response. In your responses, you want to document each thing that comes back. And it can be somewhat tricky when you have nested objects. So this is an example where you can see there's an object and then an object within an object. And that's what I mean by nested objects. So if you just have a table that lists all the responses, you have to somehow indicate when the responses are like part of another response. It's somewhat tricky, and there's different approaches that people take to that. One of them is putting the responses kind of in the right. This is an example from Stripe, where they have 3 panes, and in the right pane you show an actual response, and in the left pane you document each, like a definition of each of the responses. Let's see if we can look at that to get a little bit more detail. So this is the, where are we? Come on, there we go. Let's zoom out a bit. There we go. The charge object. All right, so on the right you can see that here's an example response from this request. And on the left, they try to define it. So ID string, and you can see the context with an example. Amount refunded, and they define it. And you can look over here and see, oh, here's a sample. So the idea is that you've got kind of this pane on the right that is similar in line with the pane on the left. And this is, a lot of people like this style. They've copied it. They've made templates that look like this. But after a while, I think it starts to break down, like captured. I don't even see it over here, right? Because it's way up. I don't even see it actually. Oh, it's up here. So they start to get out of line, and then you lose. Oh, great. Then you lose out on the whole idea of having both of them in the same view. But there's lots of different strategies that people take to trying to document nested objects. And I have several posts on my blog that really try to explore that in depth. Some people just have tables and they will kind of indent it. One project I worked on, this was a huge issue because the responses were massive. There was like hundreds of lines of response. And a lot of the times the responses contained objects within objects that repeated. So you don't want to repeat that every time. Like, for example, with a surf report, maybe it tells you the wave height by day. So you'd have Monday through Friday, and you have the wave height listed every day, right? So you only want to document that once, not for every day of the week. So you have to be inventive. Okay, we're going to get through this little section, then we'll eat here. It'll take me just 2 more minutes. The code samples, you want to provide a sample request. This can be in curl, or if there's a specific target language they use, like JavaScript, you could use that. But you want to provide a simple way that people can try out the endpoint. I already showed you how you can auto-generate these code samples in Postman, which might actually be great. But don't get carried away in trying to provide a million code samples. You'll just make life harder on you. Usually provide them in the generic format in curl, or just basically describe what you have to pass in the header and other parameters. Because if you try to maintain 8 different code samples across languages, every time you make an update, you're going to have to update all that. So, okay, I think that brings us to the end. So putting it all together, this would be what your sample endpoint might look like. Here's a surf report and our beach ID, right? This is our description of the resource. The endpoint definition. Sorry, I thought I would see more here. I guess I shortened it or something got cut off. Surf report and then the parameter. The method, the parameters that the method takes, days, times, units, whatever. The data types and the descriptions of each parameter. A sample request. A sample response. A table describing each element in the response. And here, I kind of represented that tide is nested inside of day and time, like that. Whether that works or not really sure, but that's the approach here. And I've actually gone through and really kind of, I mean, it's just a fictitious exercise, but I've tried to define what these responses are. You can also include maybe status and error codes that are specific to that endpoint, if that's something that's unique, or if it's just general for the whole API, you'll put this somewhere else. And finally, a code example. This is kind of going above and beyond what a typical reference sample would have, but here's how you might use this code example, or use this endpoint in actual working code that you could copy and paste. Now I put more here just because I want to make it so people could actually copy and paste this if it were a working endpoint into their page and see a response. So that's kind of the what a reference topic in API doc looks like. And when you document reference topics, you want to make sure every one of them follows the exact same template that you've built out for what makes sense. Okay, after lunch, we're going to get into different ways of publishing your API docs, including Swagger, which is one of the more popular interactive means. and we'll look at some other API doc strategies for publishing. Okay?
Great.
I know that I'm throwing out a lot of like technology and different things, but hopefully I'm exposing you to different tools and technologies that then you can dive more into. Like if you've never really worked with curl, you now know that it's an important part. Or if you've never worked with Postman, you know that it's important. And a lot of these topics you could dive into with a lot more depth in every way. And I try to get into that a little bit on my site. But there's one aspect of APIs that I think is one of the most important elements to know. With a software GUI, welcome back. With a software GUI, graphical user interface, you basically, the user has something to try out. You can see what buttons and screens are available and kind of guess how it works. But with an API, do you have that same GUI interface to kind of explore? No, there's nothing. That's why the documentation is so important, is because unless there's documentation describing a feature, developers won't know. You're not just going to guess an endpoint or guess a parameter. I guess you could, but it would be like shooting in the dark. So this is why the documentation is so essential. And if you don't have that awesome looking product GUI, but you just have documentation, that means your documentation is acting like the user interface for your product. So as a result, product managers who want to put their best foot forward in the market want to have documentation that looks awesome, right? That reflects how cool your API is, which is why the publishing aspect of APIs is so important. And that's what we're going to dive into here in a bit. Different ways to publish API docs in ways that is powerful. And we're going to dive into probably the most popular one, Swagger, and some other specs, as well as just tools and approaches. But before we get there, we're going to go through some other parts. Let's see. There we go. Okay. This is where we ended, putting it all together. And we talked about the different elements of a reference topic in REST API docs. We said you've got to have a resource description, endpoint definition, the method, your parameters, your sample request, sample response, descriptions of each, maybe a code sample, any status and error codes. Okay, so that's all fine, but that's only one part of API documentation. That's the reference part. You've also got these other components that people need to understand. So here's a sample template in, I think this is MuleSoft's Anypoint platform. They have some other sections like getting started, core concepts, auth and security, and then the reference, which is what we already covered. So I want to jump into some of these other aspects of API doc. You need an overview of your API. You need a getting started section. You need something about authorization keys, how people are going to submit the authorization that they need to allow the request. You need some kind of code samples and tutorials, not just a simple how-to, but something that walks users through an end-to-end process. You need to document at a whole level the response and error codes that people could see, the 404s and the 200s and what they mean. And then if you really want to go the extra mile, create a quick reference template that basically gives developers what they want, which is everything in about a page, right? All the essential information. So let's jump into each of these sections. The overview describes what your API does. And a lot of times developers actually forget about this section because they're so mired in their own technology that you'll walk into a meeting and people forget that everybody doesn't already understand what their API was created for and what it does, right? So you need to begin with that basic purpose about why would somebody use this API? What information does it return? What are the scenarios it was created for? So this is your overview section. And especially if your API is going to be online, where people will browse it in context of other APIs, you need some kind of overview that describes it. The getting started section is also essential. So this is an example from Alchemy API. And they just have some basic steps. Here you need to get an API key, you need to download some SDK, you need to select a function, plug it in and go, right? So in most programming tutorials, there's usually some kind of hello world example that takes a user from nothing to getting the minimal, simplest output you need to get the whole thing working. And this is also true with API docs. People want to be able to make something happen, right? In the simplest way. This was with the weather example, right? If you can get a weather forecast, that means you've successfully registered your API key in some way. You've figured out the syntax for making a call. You've maybe coded some parameter correctly, and you've got a response. And now, equipped with that information, you can use all the other endpoints, right? So this getting started is crucial. There's even a measurement that people will rank APIs with, kind of a time to hello world. This is a common measurement for programming docs. How long does it take to figure it out? Does it take an hour? Does it take 10 hours, 10 minutes? So this is something you might want to test. The authorization is a component that you'll need to document. And there's lots of different ways that people do the authorization. So I'm going to jump into this a little bit. But one of the reasons you need authorization is to be able to impose rate limits. You don't want to allow people to make 1 million requests. When I worked at a gamification company, sometimes people coded things in such a way that it would ping the servers like again and again and again, and it would crash them. And so we needed a way to turn off certain customers, right? You can just kill the API key, and then the requests no longer go through. So this authorization is essential to kind of go along with rate limits and to put some force around them. Hold on, I thought I had some more stuff here. I think I skipped something. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so sorry, I was jumping around before this, and this is Reveal.js. It's like a JavaScript framework, and it works a little different than PowerPoint. Okay, so we talked about API keys. You get an API key, you include it in the header, and so forth. Now, there are different ways that they do the authorization. There's one type of authorization called basic auth. This is essentially taking a username and a password and encoding it in a certain encoding it in a way that your receiving server will receive and then decode and verify against a different username and password. It's not really used that much. It's not that strong. Another type is called HMAC, hashed. Oh man, I always forget this. Some hashed something application method. Yeah, hashed method authorization code or access. Yeah, okay. Essentially, what it is this, and this is actually my diagram trying to explain it. In a nutshell, it kind of works like this. There's a secret code that's kind of like the decoder algorithm that only well, no, that's not how. Let me backtrack a little bit. Okay. The client uses a couple of different attributes, like a message and a key. And those two combine to form a certain signature. Nobody else knows what the key is except the receiving server. So when the receiving server receives the signature, it applies the same key to unlock what the message is. And then it compares the message against some other elements. In short, there's a secret key that's used and only known to both the client and the server, and it uses that secret key to form the authorization. I use this almost exclusively at a previous company, and so it was really important for people to understand how to make it work. And it was kind of tedious because people had to like know what message elements to put, and then they had to run it through a whole algorithm using certain cryptographic like JavaScript libraries in order to produce this hashed HMAC code. And then the server would get it and be like, the server knew what the algorithm was, and the cryptographic JavaScript libraries were used, and it would take and apply the same thing, and then would look to see if they matched. Anyway, it was a major pain. People hated it in terms of like just generating the key, but it's very strong, and that's why a lot of like more regulated companies will use it. Okay, OAuth, you've probably heard of this. This takes advantage of a third-party authorization server. So in this example, your app has some kind of login that it goes through, and it authenticates with some kind of authentication server, gets a certain access token, and then uses that access token in the request it makes to the API in order to authorize. So all your authorization is handled by another server, which could be Facebook, could be Twitter. You see this all the time. Do you want to allow such and such app to authorize you on this other application? So it's very common, but it's complicated. The nice thing is you really don't have to explain a whole lot about how it works, just what developers need to do to make it work. Okay, the rate limits, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but if your API only lets you call like 750 requests per hour, you need to describe what those are. And a lot of times pricing for the API use is based on rate limits. So here you kind of dip a little bit into marketing, and sometimes different levels of customers have different access to different endpoints. So in one, like maybe your highest level customer can use all the endpoints and get back all the information, and your lowest customer can only see certain information returned. So there are different like tiers that you can apply to how people can use the API, and that all needs to be documented. Yeah, in one place I was at, this actually was a sticky point because we didn't want certain of the lower tier clients to know what they were missing, so we kind of walled this off, and they didn't really want to upsell, so it was challenging to try to make this explicit in the documentation in a good way. Another aspect is your error and status codes. So these are, every time you make a request, if you remember, let's go back to that simple curl example that I did at the start. You remember this where I just used a curl example to pull my site? Well, in the top here is the status code, 200. Right? This is a universal status code. If you were to search for HTTP status codes, these are standard sort of codes that are pretty universal. So, sorry, I'm already getting stuff back. So if you were to actually just look on Wikipedia, you can see what all these codes are. 200 is, like, your company's not going to implement 200 and make it mean something other than OK. So these are common codes. Now, obviously, most of these probably won't even apply, but maybe 302 is one you want to document, or some others that are more common. And when you're playing around with your endpoints, what you want to do is try to break them by putting in bad parameters, mistyping things, and see what sort of status codes come back, because you'll need to document them. You can also just ask developers for a list of status codes, but it's better to try to surface them yourself. And you'll want to list these in some place in the API. Probably not on every page unless it's specific to that endpoint, but a list of the status codes, and not only like what they mean, but what you should do if you get a certain status code. Very common one is a bad parameter. Let's say the parameter is a Boolean and somebody put the wrong value. They put like a 1 or a 0 instead of true or false. Maybe they thought you could just use either. And so you get back a certain code that says JSON unauthorized. So the user would be wondering what to make of that. Well, if JSON unauthorized always means that there's some kind of error with your parameter, you should include that in your status code so that people can make use of the troubleshooting information. Sometimes an endpoint is very specific, or the response is very specific to an endpoint. So here in the header, this endpoint says, it tells you like limits, remaining, current, reset. So if those kind of codes and that kind of information is specific to a particular endpoint, you want to include that in the endpoints documentation. All right, so as you're going through and surfacing all these response codes, here are potential reasons why errors could be happening. Invalid API key, the wrong data type, bad syntax with the JSON, there's no data in the system to return, the max or min values are exceeded, there's a parameter missing, there's a network error. So all of this could happen, and you want to help users overcome this. So you need to have some kind of section that pairs up the response codes with these problems and helps users through them. So this is the sort of thing that developers are going to miss. They're not going to want to put anything like this in there. So this is why you have to really call it out. Code samples are also something you'll document. Even though with REST APIs, you're mainly working with requests and they're not a specific programming language, most companies will create sample apps in different languages. So you'll have a sample Java implementation, a sample PHP implementation. And you'll probably have to document that. So this can be very challenging because you probably don't work with that programming language all that much. Now all of a sudden you have to provide a very concise, high-level, kind of accurate guide about how to use and deploy some sample application in another language. So this is a challenge, but you can usually work with a developer, ask them to talk you through different parts of the code, take notes, review it with them, learn it on your own, try it out. The best thing you can do when you're documenting code samples is to try them yourself. Make sure that you can run them and can be successful. And as you're documenting these, take some comfort in the fact that the user is probably a lot more familiar with that language than you. So some things that may seem a little bit unfamiliar might be familiar to that user. Now, identifying exactly what is familiar and what isn't requires some knowledge of the programming language, right? You have to know what you're doing. What is it that you're doing that's standard versus what are you doing that's abnormal? What is specific to your company's way versus what is just general Java or basic JavaScript? So you want to focus on highlighting what's unique, what your company is particularly doing different, not just describing general programming approaches. All right, and finally, the quick reference guide. This is an example where the person lists all the different endpoints with a link to each, brief description. So I've found that people really love quick reference guides. When I first started creating these years ago, I had a program manager almost come to tears. He was so happy to see a quick reference guide. He's like, a tech writer finally gets it. A 2-page guide is all that users want. Right? He was so joyous to have simplicity. And developers, they're going to be all over the map in terms of their proficiency. Some people really just need this list. Other people are going to need a lot more hand-holding. But at least with the quick reference guide, you can address the power user who doesn't need a lot of hand-holding. All right, now, if you want to explore more APIs, see this section of my course, and you can walk through different activities with the Eventbrite API, another weather API called Eris, Flickr, and Clout. So there are samples you can do. You can play around with any API, really. You don't have to do these, but try making a request, see how they act. They're all different. Like, all the documentation for each API is totally different from one another. The way they do it, the way they publish it, the terminology they use, the whole way they approach the API. Some put all the parameters in the URL, some put it in the request body, some don't even have parameters. So it's kind of fun to explore. And I'm just going to pass these.
They are maintained by nonprofits?
The APIs? No, by companies. And in fact, there's most companies, they sell access to their API. This is the site you want to go to browse the APIs that are available. This is called Programmable Web. And if you go to API directory, you can just search them. Google Maps, for example. This is the one Sarah Maddox usually uses in her workshops and examples. But all of these have different APIs. For example, the Flickr one is here, and it's going to be set up differently. How do I get to it? How to? They're going to be set up differently on each site. So it's kind of an interesting, well, I probably just find it easier like this. Did I just search for the same thing I was? There we go. So, see, Flickr's approach looks completely different from some of these others that I've been showing. I mean, they list their methods here. They don't even call them endpoints. And they've got a specific template that they go through. But here they decide to list all their error codes, like for every one. And a lot of these are the same. They even have an API Explorer. And this is something we're going to jump into. Let me see if we're getting into it right now. Soon. The API Explorer allows you to try things out. So you can, if you figure out exactly what values to put here, you can make it return things directly in the browser. And a lot of good API docs have this. We're going to jump into that more. But any questions about like just different elements of the API docs? We talked about the reference docs, all these other sections. This is just like an overview of all these different things you need in API docs. Greg.
That's actually just a comment. Something you showed or mentioned earlier just made me think about it. But one thing that worked pretty good for me when I was doing this is that in my example code, I would set variables up top, and then down below I would use those. So essentially, it would be real easy for a customer of ours to do a copy, paste, and then just change user ID to whatever, server name to whatever. And so that they can just do a copy paste of the whole thing and run it or paste it into a script or do whatever. And it just made it a lot easier rather than real examples like Bill, Fred, John Doe, or whatever. I'd set them and then it was color coded so they knew every single thing that they would have to change in a glance.
That's a great, yeah. So you have a bunch of code examples, and rather than hard coding in the values, user ID and stuff, you put them at the top as variables to make it easy to just swap in your own. Yeah. Okay.
Curl is like curl, and then it was just in Unix. It's just $, whatever, and it would. Yeah. It seemed to work pretty well. I think people would like
Great.
copy paste pretty easily. Yeah.
I've seen some doc sites where if you have the user log in, then you can save their save details about them, right? And you can populate their API key into code examples and stuff. I think Stripe might do that and some others, but it requires a lot more coding, and you have to have like somebody logging into something. But the more you can make it copy and pasteable and easy to customize, like you described, the better.
The first thing is authentication, you're right.
Yeah.
So once you get that, like with a lot of RESTful APIs, I think once you authenticate, you get like a session cookie that has some kind of time to live. And once that's still live, you can just start sending a bunch of requests. In other words, I wasn't having to authenticate every time.
Yeah, well, different APIs work in different ways. A lot of the APIs I've worked with seem to require the authentication or the key in some way to be passed with every request. My understanding was that REST, in contrast to like different sorts of APIs, doesn't remember your state, so it's not going to remember. I don't think you can establish an active session with a REST API. I could be wrong, but I'll have to look at that more. But yeah, definitely the idea of getting a user working and making requests and doing something in the code is what you want to do, because developers, they want to try something. I once sat down with a field engineer as we were going through this new release, and he immediately wanted to try out the calls. He wanted to see the response. He wasn't interested in conceptual descriptions and this is what you'll get back. No, he's like, let me try it. And he wanted to see it and he wanted to see what came back. So that is what is going to inform this next section on publishing APIs. How can you make your doc experience, your API doc experience, conform to this mindset of the user who wants to try something out and see for him or herself what is returned? Okay. All right, so this brings us into a discussion of tools. And when you're working with API doc, you'll have to usually decide how you're going to publish this stuff. And this is where it gets fun. If your developers are contributing and they're writing stuff, they hate help authoring tools. Developers, they want to just stick within their own tool set, which is their IntelliJ code editor or whatever they're using. Right? They want to put doc as close to the source as possible. They're used to generating documentation from programming code itself, which is how Java documentation was done. And they don't want to use XML. They'll never use DITA unless you somehow simplify it. Right? So it's a different sort of world. All right, so let me jump ahead here. I want to jump into some stuff. When you're trying to decide about tools, though, if developers aren't going to write, then you have a lot more flexibility, right? You don't have to go into their tool world. You can be more independent. But there's a story. Let me see if I have it listed here. No, I don't. Sorry. There's a story that a lady named Riona McNamara told. She was working at Google. And I guess she was having trouble getting traction with their documentation. A lot of people complained that they couldn't find it. It was out of date. So she implemented a system where the developers would write the documentation in Markdown and put it in files directly in the same code repositories of their programming code. And somebody wrote some kind of viewer that would read the Markdown file and display it or something. But just allowing developers to write in Markdown and keep it with their source code apparently turned around the whole software programming documentation internally at Google. So there's a great video on that. But the idea, or the main point, is that if you want developers to write, you need to use developer tools. And if you're not having developers write, you don't have to worry about that as much. But one developer tool that is pretty cool is GitHub. Now, if you've worked with GitHub before, you're probably familiar with this. It's usually used as a code repository tool in the way that software programmers interact. But it also comes with a cool wiki. Every repository has its own wiki that you can use. So I'm going to kind of sit here because I want to show some of these things. So if you're in GitHub, now I had you guys sign up for a GitHub account, so why don't we make use of it here by doing a simple GitHub wiki. Go ahead and go to github.com and create a new repository by clicking Create New in the upper right and choose Repository. GitHub is definitely the most exciting, like, collaborative revision control system out there. So if you have a chance to use it, definitely, like, try it. Anyway, click New Repository. Call your repository whatever you want. I'll call mine Sacramento Workshop. You can type a description if you want. Now, before you click Create, though, I want you to select the Initialize this repository with a README. Select that checkbox. All right, and then click Create Repository. So now you've created a repository, and what this is this is going to be your container for code, right? As a developer, you're going to put all your code here. But there's also, if you'll notice here, a wiki that accompanies every single repo, and you could put your documentation here. So you can click Create First Page if you want. You can just type hello, whatever you have here, and click Save, and suddenly you've got a wiki. So this is the simplest way to do documentation for an API. And some APIs actually use this. Obviously, it's not very well branded to your company, but it's close to the code, and you have a lot of flexibility. So have you all created the wiki part? Okay, so if you've never worked with GitHub, this will be new. If you have, this will just be old school. But one thing that GitHub allows you to do is work locally on all your files. So you'll see this little box down here that says Clone this wiki locally with a Copy to Clipboard button. See that? Click that. Go to your command line and type git clone and then space and then paste in. Now in Windows you can't actually paste. I think you have to like control click or right click. Oh, you can paste now? Okay. So go ahead and do that. Hit return, and it has cloned your wiki. So if you type in Windows dir or in Mac and Unix ls, it lists all the contents of the directory you're in. And you can see here I've got Sacramento Workshop Wiki. So if you want to go into that in both Windows and Mac, you would type cd and start typing it, and then hit tab. It'll complete the rest. And now you're in it. ls lists all your contents, and you can see what's in there. Now you can also just browse to it through your Finder or whatever. I can't remember what Windows calls it, your File Explorer. You can see that you've got the same stuff. So I'm going to open this in my text editor and make some edits. Click Save. So once I save it, in order to get it back up to the wiki, right? Because this is where the files live. This is where the default branch and everything is the origin, I guess. And I've cloned it on my local drive. So you see that currently nothing is uploaded. So what you do in GitHub is you add all your pages to your repository. So you type git space add and then dot for everything. Git status to see the status of all the files that are being tracked by Git. And then you do git space commit -m and you type a commit message like that. I don't know, you probably can't see this very well. But this would be your commit, and then you push it back to the server with git push. And now if I were to go and refresh this page, you can see that my edit appears. So one reason I wanted to highlight this workflow is because even if you're not using GitHub's wiki for your documentation, this is how you check out source code from pretty much any revision control system. Do you work with other revision control like Mercurial or Perforce, SVN? Okay. So a lot of it is very similar. There are differences, obviously, otherwise it would be the same. But this process of using the command line to clone the repository, you commit your or you add your files that you want tracked, you commit it, and then you push it back up. This is how a lot of people, this is how developers work. So this is second nature to them. And when I was working at a previous company, we used this method to interact with our documentation. All our documentation were text files, right? So you can use this sort of approach. And you can have different team members committing their edits to a repository, and you can pull and get the latest updates, and you can work through it like that. Want me to close this door? Yeah. Have any of you ever used a revision control system to manage your documentation? Yeah, a few people? Okay. How did it work out? Do you get merge conflicts all the time?
It's way better than SVN or Perforce.
Yeah.
Because you can have a full copy of you have a local repository, and you have the GitHub repository, really, right?
Yeah.
So you can work away, and then commit your changes, and then push them up to GitHub. And I think it's a lot better than like SVN, where you check out a couple of files, work on them locally. It's not a copy of the entire repository.
Yeah, let's draw that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that slightly different angle makes things like version and diff and things like that. I think Git is just superior.
So I'm going to draw out, this workflow that Greg is describing is important to know. So you have this origin source on GitHub, right, where you've got the content. And when you clone it, you're actually copying the whole thing locally. So it's exactly equal. And you can have other people, let's say that's cloning, other people have copies as well, right? So let's say you've all checked out the same document and you all make edits, right? And then if you push it back, it's going to complain. It's going to say, hey, there's some conflicts and so forth. But that's usually not how people work, right? Usually you have one person editing a file and you're not all editing the same file at the same time. But let's say that your software developers have their source here, right? They have got some kind of source code. And you want to make comments in that source code. You check out the source code, or you create a branch, as it's called, and check out the source code. And you can commit your changes to this branch all on your own, and it's separate from their code. So they can continue to work on stuff, commit it, and so forth, and you can make your edits to the documentation in this branch. At some point, they're going to merge your branch back into the master, and hopefully there won't be any conflicts. But you can have different people working in different branches, and they don't step on each other's toes until you try to do this merge back into the system. But I'm convinced that this is this model is going to replace the whole like CCMS model, where typically tech writers, when they want to scale with larger teams, they buy a giant component content management system. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and software developers have been using this model for years. They've been collaborating with people. If you're working in text file formats, DIT is a text file format. Markdown, HTML, it works, right? If you've got a format like Word or FrameMaker or something else that when you open it up in a text editor, it just looks like a bunch of numbers, it doesn't work.
Is there any kind of auto merging?
Yeah, well,
that sometimes doesn't know how to merge?
Yeah, if there aren't any conflicts, it will automatically merge. So as long as the same text, as long as there are no merge problems, it will auto-merge. But there's something called P4 merge, is one like merge program where, let's say that there's a merge it to text. Well, GitHub's going to automatically, or Git is going to automatically launch a merge program that shows you a graphical user interface of like, hey, this text and this text are the same, which one do you want? And you select one, and it shows you the other things, you like select it, and then once you close that out, it commits it, or you commit it, and then then the merge happens. So yeah, I mean, you get merge conflicts, but by and large, I'm pretty persuaded to this model. I think it makes things a lot more fun to see like everybody working in the same code. And it's how you would get the code from developers, so that's why I really wanted to bring it up.
Actually, the merge works better than I mean, I really was fearful at first. This is going to be a major mess up when we start. But we're collaborating on projects. I'm just coming at from a documentation point of view or whatever, and doing labs and stuff. But our developers are too, and the merge and the diff and everything, they have complete faith in it. I mean, more than I do.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just
Yeah.
pretty impressive actually.
Almost every software shop has got some system already in place. So if you want to plug into that, you should probably have that infrastructure already there. Although sometimes I think it would be more beneficial to plug into something like GitHub because it has better UI controls for looking at changes and adding comments and stuff. But either way, it's a cool sort of process. Okay, so that's GitHub. And one other thing about GitHub is that it allows you to write in Markdown. This is something that I'm assuming a lot of people may already know, but if you don't know what Markdown is, it's a simple way of writing HTML. It's kind of like a wiki syntax, where you do asterisks instead of bullets, pound signs for headings. And what it allows you to do is really work in the code without being encumbered by all these angle bracket tags that make it difficult to see what you're working with. So you could just write in HTML, that's fine, but it's harder to see. So Markdown takes and processes the white space and implements it as like a paragraph break, or it has a very specific sort of syntax. And there are a lot of different flavors of Markdown, which is why some people dislike it. But in general, it can be a nice way to write documentation. In contrast to like an XML language, it's not going to require validation. With XML, if you make an error, things don't build, right? Which is actually quite nice because then you see the errors. But with Markdown, if you make an error, it just may not format correctly into HTML, and you won't notice it until you see the page. Okay, we talked about version control, pull requests. All right, now, there are 3 REST API specs that you should be aware of. One is called Swagger, another is called RAML, another is API Blueprint. These are attempts, kind of like DITA is an attempt to describe a model for a certain type of information. So with DITA, right, you have different ways of describing help information in a structure that if you put it in that structure, it could be transformed into certain outputs. Well, with Swagger and these others, if you describe your API using the certain format, different systems can take and process that description and output it into different cool sites. So the most common site is I've got way more information in here than I need. Okay, the most common one is the Pet Store API. We saw this earlier. Go ahead and just type Pet Store Swagger, and it should take you to this site. Here's how it works. All the different sections here expand to show you the endpoints. So this is your pet resource. These are all your pet endpoints. And earlier you created a pet with one of these endpoints, the post one, right? So go ahead and click that and create a new pet. One thing that is not very intuitive about the Swagger UI is exactly what this means. When you click this yellow box, it's going to populate the body value. So this thing on the right here is just an example of the body parameter. and the body parameter is something you need to pass here. Basically, it gives you forms to input all the values, and then it's going to allow you to try it out. So go ahead and put a different ID, whatever you have in here. Write your pet name. I have a cat named Bentley, so I'll put it there. And click try it out. This is the big bang here.
I missed how you got the
So
body to populate.
you click the yellow box, the example value, and it should populate. Yeah, that's what's not so intuitive. And so what it does is first it shows you what the request looks like in curl, and then it shows you the response. So here's my new cat, Bentley. You could take this same request in curl and pass it on the command line, and it should work. Yeah, see, it works as well. So what people like about this is that it allows users to learn about your API while playing with it at the same time. And when I implemented a Swagger UI output for one of my APIs that I documented, people loved it. Now, Swagger tends to break down when you have long request bodies. So over here on the right, you'll see that you've got an example value. And what if you said, I don't understand what ID is, and why do we have what is this ID here as opposed to this one? Well, theoretically, you click model, which is grayed out, and it should describe it. But the problem is it doesn't show nested JSON. So if you look here, pet, this is actually somewhat confusing because it's not as if you would copy this. This is a description of the JSON using a JSON format. But if you look at category, rather than having the description for category appear right where category is, it gives you a reference to category. So you have to look back down here to see what category contains. And for some reason, they don't have descriptions in here. I don't know why, but you would see descriptions in each of these. All right, so let's see. I've got an example of the weather API that I put into the Swagger format. Let me see if I have it handy here. All right. I don't have it right there, so I'll show you how you work with it. When you want to create a Swagger output, it can be kind of confusing. It took me a couple weeks to figure this out. So basically, just pay attention here. There's different parts of Swagger. One is called Swagger UI. This is the interface that renders this looking site here with the collapsible sections. And it's just a GitHub project called Swagger UI. There are actually other Swagger UI type names, but this is the one you want. So you would download this zip file onto your machine. All right, I'll put this here in this special folder. All right. Inside this Swagger UI file, once I uncompress it, there's a bunch of stuff. This is if you want to build it yourself. We don't really want to build the whole project ourselves, so you just take what's in the dist folder, copy that, and use that, and you can delete the rest. So I can delete all this other stuff I downloaded. Move to trash. So once I open dist, there's an index file that allows you to specify where your Swagger YAML file is. So if I scroll down here, you can see that this is where it's reading the Swagger spec. I talked about how the Swagger spec describes the API. So if you were to look at this, this is the description. Now this isn't JSON syntax, but a more common one is YAML. But anyway, this is how you describe it. So, actually, let's jump over to the YAML one. There's another tool called Swagger Editor where you would write this description. This is all right, let me open example. Pet store simple. Okay. You start out by basically typing certain key value or certain keys and values, Swagger 2.0, info, and then each of these is like spaced in a couple of spaces. This is YAML syntax, and you have to follow it exactly. I guess this looks like one space, but it should really be two. This whole thing is detailed. See, when you get down to paths, then you list your endpoint, and then you list the method for the endpoint, you describe it, and these are at different levels, and you have to follow this very specific syntax. So if you search for Open API Swagger specification, the name Swagger actually changed to Open API. Search for the specification. You will find it right here, and it tells you what is required at each of these levels. So, hold on, once you get past the introductory stuff, it tells you the schema. So if you want to document Swagger, you're going to have to stick your head in this file and figure it out, right? It takes a while. It tells you what each field in the schema is and what the value is. And below it, there's going to be a bunch of descriptions. But for example, these are all the different objects that are going to be in the Swagger schema. And the paths one, you click down to it, and it shows you an example of how you would format it. So, although it's kind of not straightforward how you do this, you can figure it out from examples and from piecing it together. Once you code this spec here, and you've got it valid, which you validate because you're working in this API, then you replace the reference here to the URL to point to your own Swagger spec. And that's basically all you do. One hassle is that you can't run Swagger locally unless you have a web development server. So there's a nice little tool called XAMPP that once you install it, once you install XAMPP, you can run a web server locally on your machine and simulate as if you're uploading to a web server. So this console gives you a way to start. Yeah, and I know I'm going fast. I'm giving you an overview of what's involved if you want to do the Swagger thing. You start your web server, right? You go into this htdocs folder, which is where it reads your XAMPP files. And here I've got one called Swagger UI. So if I were to go to localhost Swagger UI, it's going to pretend to be a web server. And I put in the same information from our weather API, and you can see the different things. So if I expand full data weather, I could put in a latitude, a longitude, and click try it out. I forgot what the latitude and longitude would be, but I do know that it does work.
Could you use IIS as an alternative on a Windows system?
Could you use IIS? Probably. I'm not. But yeah, I actually don't know. As long as it's any web server, it should work. Let me just. Yeah. Go ahead.
If we're going to use Swagger, does that mean we can only display, we can only view the documentation through this Swagger?
Yeah.
layout?
Yeah. It presents some challenges because now once you have once you have the output here, it's not really enough for documentation, right? You've got a lot more to cover in your documentation, and now you have this separate output. So the way I did it is basically I have a link in my documentation that would open up a Swagger file, and people could play around with it there. So you end up kind of duplicating your parameter descriptions, but you give people a playground. Yeah, there's there's this idea among the Swagger developers and developer community that this is all you need for documenting your API, which might be true if it's a really simple API, but it's certainly rarely the case. I mean, API documentation is much more comprehensive than you can do here. And you can't really integrate this thing into other doc sets that I know of. It's its own self-contained output, which gets back to the problem I was talking about earlier with self-contained outputs. I have seen it done with one static site generator called eBook or something that somebody showed me, but it must have been a custom hack, so I don't really know much about it. But just to finish off this example, I do want to see if this works. So let's go to Sacramento, and I'll just paste those values in. So the idea is that a developer would come in. Hopefully you would populate it with sample values and not require somebody to go retrieve them like this, but I also detail another hack I did in getting the API key to auto-populate. I described that on my blog. But if I click try it out, it's going to call the server and return the header or the response. So yeah, I'm actually getting a response here, a real one. The weather is something. All right, so that is Swagger. Now there's other sort of tools like this. One is called API Blueprint. It's an alternative to Swagger. And probably the easiest way to make this run is by using a site called Apiary. I already plugged in the weather thing in here, so once you sign in with GitHub, or however you sign in, let me choose the weather API. You can see that it's going to give us a similar kind of interface. Expand out. You've got your endpoints here, which you can go to. You can see some parameters, and then you can click try and call resource, and it's actually going out and calling it. And you can see the request and the response here. So again, it allows you to switch to kind of like a Postman integrated in your docs. But the idea is that you're learning about the docs at the same time as you're experimenting with them.
Just while you were doing that, I brought up a site that is a JSON viewer. So if you have a pretty big response, you can just grab the whole thing and paste it in there, and then it just kind of helps you browse through it. It's like a browser for JSON. It's easy to read. Kind of neat.
Yeah, I've got some other Chrome plugin also that's automatically converting the JSON, I believe. I'm not sure. I think at some point there's an extension I installed as well. Now there's another tool called Raml that's like a competitor to Swagger, and it does the same sort of thing, but the spec is a little bit different, and the different tools are unique. But here's an example of that. Now this one I've got already on this site. When this loads, you can see the endpoints here. It's a little cleaner interface. I think it looks better. But you click Get. You go into a description of your API, get a header, and you get to, whoops, where's my try button? Try it. So you'd paste the mash shape key there. I don't have it auto-filled with this example. But it too goes out and gets the stuff. About the only way to get this kind of interactivity in your documentation is by relying on these sort of tools. You may be fortunate to have some kind of homegrown API explorer that people have built, or maybe you want to implement the run it in Postman button that we talked about earlier. But if you just want to have some kind of interactive sandbox for people to explore, Swagger, RAML, API Blueprint, these are all options. Swagger is the most popular, but it may not be the most intuitive, may not be the best like spec coded. There's definitely some bugs about it that drive me nuts, and it's not easy to figure out. But once you do, you get the hang of it, and it's just becomes somewhat trivial in terms of just adding more content there. Any questions, thoughts?
I think the run button has a lot of potential too. I think that sounds pretty cool for the plugin. Have
Yeah.
you messed around with Apogee? Have you done anything with them?
Apogee, yeah, they are a full service API platform, so you can host your whole API there, have it managed, and I think they use Swagger as well internally. I believe they have I'm not entirely sure, but I think they have some kind of integration with Drupal and Swagger. I actually don't know, but yeah, it's not the kind of platform you would just use if you were only doing docs, I believe. It's more intended to be like your full service management. Everything's in there. Yeah. All right. Couple more tools I wanted to point out. Let's jump ahead. There's one called README.io. Let's say you don't want to do one of these automated things, but you still want to have a try it out feature in your docs. You should check out README.io. This allows you to do a similar sort of thing. A similar thing as these other tools where you can try it out. I can't remember if I still have. Yeah, I think, you know what? I have it as a different login. Let me try it one more time. They told me that their app went viral when the owl that hides its eyes, when they showed that. Okay, so here, it gives you more of a GUI interface for doing all this. You enter your API settings, information about headers that people will need, each your endpoint. So it gives you a form to fill out, essentially. Advanced options, and it's actually, this is a new platform. It's quite well. I've heard mixed things about people using it in terms of performance, but maybe they've solved those. It's quite a beautiful layout, and when you're done and you view it, it would kind of look like this. You would go into your endpoint, and you see the parameters laid out in a nice table with some example values. You know, it takes your example and renders it that way, shows you results, and then at the bottom you can try it out. So in the same way, it's going to show you the response directly here. So this is a nice, easy way to do it. And let me tell you, building your own site takes a long time. So if you can plug into something like this for, I don't know, $70 a month, it will save you a ton in costs. But I want to point out one other tool. We're going to skip this one. It's not very exciting. I thought I had it somewhere here. Static site generators. This is a fun one. And if you want to explore the world of static site generators, there's no easier way than through something called Jekyll. Oh, I've already, there we go. And this is one of the coolest tools I've ever discovered. Okay, so Jekyll is a static site generator. All it does is, well, let me do a quick little demo of it. So let me open up. Okay, so you have whatever your text author is, your text is. And for my project, let me just open up my Jekyll project. Give me a second here to jump into this. Okay, you've got a text editor here, and with Jekyll you have certain front matter here. So everything's in text. And this follows the syntax, the YAML syntax, just key value pairs. And then you can just start typing, whatever you want. The nice thing about being in the code is that you can do whatever you want. You can easily add code samples, get syntax highlighting, add JavaScript, whatever. You've got the whole tool is completely open in terms of the layout and the code. And the way you see what it looks like is you, let me go back to this directory. What was I call it? Jekyll theme. Okay. In order to start working with it, you just type Jekyll serve. And what it does is gives you a preview of what your site is going to look like. So it gives you this URL, which you kind of configure. And then as you're kind of authoring in it, you can see it. So I was on the, what was I on? I was on the About page. Forgot where that was. So anyway, let me go to a certain page. Let's say I'm in theme instructions. Oh, there we go. About the theme author. As soon as you start typing here and hit save, it's going to rebuild the site for you and show you that whatever you're typing there. So you can have two windows open. You have your Jekyll project open on one side. You have your other content on the other side, and you can just kind of see what you're doing, and it just keeps rebuilding. If you don't have to make it rebuild, but if you want to see it in real time like that. The reason that this is relevant to API docs is because it's a much more techie sort of format that gives you complete freedom to build in whatever kind of endpoints and stylized templates and other sort of code you want to have in there. And this is actually a theme I built, so you're welcome to use this if you want to explore Jekyll. But there is one other cool thing with Jekyll and GitHub Pages that I just have to point out really quickly. So if we go to GitHub Pages, the way this works is if you create a repo in GitHub Pages, you use the little board here. As long as you do a couple things, you can essentially get GitHub Pages to build your site. So you create a repo, you create a branch called GitHub-Pages, and then you commit your Jekyll site to this GitHub Pages. GitHub has some Jekyll hooks that will build your GitHub site into like a regular website. So all you do when you want to make an update is you commit your changes to the repository, and Jekyll builds your site for you automatically. It's totally free. And this is how I actually have my blog now. It's all just commits to Jekyll. So you change one word and push your commit, and Jekyll rebuilds it. And the reason it's cool is because you're basically you're entering this approach of fast publishing where you don't have to rebuild your entire doc set. You just commit a simple change, and you've got your build process kicking off on your server. So anyway, check it out if you're interested, and you can explore it. GitHub is definitely going places because they've got a strong community, especially with open source.
That's the first I've heard of the term static site generator. It almost seemed like what we just did was a dynamic site generator. I mean,
Yeah.
It's running in the background, you make a change and it automatically builds it, puts it, boom. It's
Yeah, well, here's the idea. Okay, admittedly, people don't like the name static because it sounds very unsexy, right? You don't want anything static. You want dynamic. But in the old days, or not really the old days, the main model for building a website is you have some database here that has your content. And you have your website here. And when a user goes to the website, there's certain tags that pull content from the database and put it here dynamically. So if you were to just look at the page here, it's empty. There's no content. It's dynamically injected from your database each time you go. But some people say, you know what, that's really insane. That every time a user goes to your site, you're rebuilding your page or you're dynamically populating your page. Why don't you just populate it with the content you need so that it's static, and it will be a lot faster, and it will scale more. So with Jekyll and other static site generators, and there's hundreds of them actually, they don't have the database. They do away with the database. They do all the building either locally or on your server. So you have your stuff built here, and then you push it out. So it's a lightweight model. It's 100% secure because there's nothing to really, unless people just hack HTML, they're not going to corrupt your database. And it's super lightweight. So I don't know if you've ever tried to get some like big system installed at work, but you know, with the database model, you usually have to have PHP, you have to have MySQL, you have to have Linux, and I'm forgetting something else, Apache, right? Whereas this static site generator model, you just need a Linux server, or you just need a web host.
I guess that works good for documentation.
Yeah.
For other things like your bank account information, that probably would not work.
Yeah, if you want to have an experience where a user logs in, yeah, then you're sunk, right? But you can combine this with other login approaches and make it work.
Do you front end Jekyll with some authoring tool?
It just uses HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can use other tools to you can use any of the sort of web tools that people use for building websites, compressors and Sass and Grunt and all these things. But by and large, UX people like it. And the thing that gets me kind of excited about Jekyll is that it's lightweight enough that, let's say you're at a company and they already have a website. Your company's already got a website. You want to take and publish your documentation onto the main website. Well, you don't want to deliver a self-contained output that's already got its own skin and frame and all this stuff like you get with a lot of the help authoring tools. You want to just deliver whatever layout that is needed, which may be none. So you can do that. You can define what layout it is and deliver that so that it's ultimately your tech docs can live with marketing docs on the same sort of site. All right, we are getting near the end. Let's see, I've gone through a lot of these. I want to jump, let me see. I want to jump over to the job parts. I wonder if I have anything on jobs. I don't think I have anything here, but I do have a section on my site that I haven't really mentioned. I think I started adding it after I had put together these slides. So let me just jump to it really quickly and point it out. This is section 8.1, job market. So how do you translate all of these skills into tangible, like valuable evidence of your ability that translates into demand in the market for your skills? Having recently just gone through this job search process, I've kind of got a fresh awareness of what employers are looking for. And there's definitely some challenges. People want you to know everything. They want you to know 5 languages. But most job descriptions will say that as long as you know one main core language, that's enough. Like if you have at least an understanding of Java or C++ or something else, or Python, they're usually happy with that. And I saw this on so many different job descriptions, like must have knowledge of at least one main programming language, blah, blah, blah. And you get into the job interview or more details about it, and it doesn't really come up. But here's the scenario that is hard. You've got a REST API you've got a REST API that isn't in any programming language, right? So you don't need to know Java or anything. But you've got a lot of different clients for the company who want a specific sample app in their language. So you may have like 5 different reference implementations in different languages. And what you have to be able to do is provide documentation for the different sample apps well enough to persuade employers that you are capable of doing that kind of thing. What are your questions or thoughts around the job market with APIs? Do you think that it's a sort of catch-22 experience where they're going to want you to have a bunch of API doc experience without ever having had the opportunity to build that experience? Or do you have any sort of thoughts or questions about the job market with APIs?
I think if you were starting a hunt right now,
Yeah.
you go in on LinkedIn and look up API documentation or something like that, or technical writer API. I mean, I'm not sure how I would start my search, but if I was going to try and land a technical writer job, I think that's probably where I'd go for that niche.
So employers are thinking the same thing, right? They're going in on LinkedIn, or recruiters. They're searching for technical writer, Java, API, right? So you want to have those keywords at least in your profile. And you'll get contacts from a lot of different people. I made the mistake of posting my resume on Monster, which I don't recommend. There's like, they farm it out to a million different recruiting agencies, and you never hear the end of it. And they're all these 3 to 6 month contracts. They're just like not very exciting positions. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something insightful here to say about the job market. There's definitely a strong need. Somebody told me, this was a Google recruiter. He told me that Google, and I don't know if this is true, right? But this is what he said. He said Google struggles the most to fill 2 types of positions. 1, UX designers, and 2, technical writers who can write for developers, write developer doc. And I threw that by Andrew, and he was like, hadn't heard that before. But it made me think, this is a position that is in super high demand because writing for developers, let's face it, is a serious challenge. To make good documentation that helps people through extremely technical landscapes to code successfully is a huge sort of thing to do well. But there are a lot of different opportunities. Find an opportunity that allows you to get your foot in the door, or even if you have an opportunity to transition at your current company into more technical roles, you need to build a portfolio. You need to build some kind of evidence that you've got this capability. When I was first moving into developer doc, I had moved out here from Utah. Our company had laid off all the tech writers. And so I was like, man, I'm going to do something different. I want to do developer documentation, right? It's a much better market. And the people at the company were like, well, we really want somebody who knows JavaScript more in depth, and we're not sure. It looks like in the past, you were mostly kind of doing GUI documentation. We're not sure you have the technical depth and stuff. So I went through an entire JavaScript course on lynda.com, on some other sites, wrote these super detailed notes. I actually still have them on my site. So I think I put them under tech notes, right? So I wrote all these notes about JavaScript, and there's a navigation. It's just not showing on the site. And I was very, very enthusiastic for the position, which counts like 50%. But if you can marry your enthusiasm with some level of, hey, this is something technical I've done, you can usually get your foot in the door. And it turned out they did give me a chance, and I totally went to town on the JavaScript. I loved it. It was the most fun language ever, because you can do everything in your browser. It's simpler than the other languages, and it's fun to play with. But you have to build some kind of portfolio. Even if you don't have a direct example of an actual API you've documented, do something technical, even if it's just notes about how a programming language works. What I think would be really impressive is if you were to take an existing API and format it in the Swagger spec and say, hey, here's your company's API in the Swagger spec. You do that, and I guarantee you, you'll have the job. There's really there's really a gap for people who know Swagger or RAML. Not many tech writers do. In fact, I don't think I've met any who, well, I have met some. I was going to say I haven't met very many who are really strong in doing that. And not only in coding the Swagger spec, but even helping developers put the right annotations to do it, you know. So there's a whole level, or there's a whole gap there in the market about people who know these specifications for REST APIs. A lot of tech writers who know XML specifications, did a doc book, and so forth, but in the API doc world, these REST specs are probably more valuable. That's about it, all I have. But any questions, thoughts, any concerns you have, things you want to learn that you haven't learned? Shuri.
One thing that I've been trying to get into recently is trying to get involved with API design during the development phase. Because as you mentioned earlier, API is the key for the developers, right? There's no UI. And usually tech writers come in the end of this cycle, right? When things have been developed and then the developers push this stuff to us and then we write about it. But a lot of the times in my experience, because there's a lot of, let's say, offshore developers and they're all scattered, I'm running into a lot of inconsistencies, typos, things that don't make sense, and by the time it gets to me to document, it's too late. And so, you know, all the inconsistencies and ugliness of stuff comes out in the documentation. I'm having a hard time describing it and all that stuff, and that's what goes out to the customer. And API is a public contract, right? Whatever you publish, that's it. You know, it's hard to change it back or hard to remove stuff. So I try to get involved up front. And so I'm in the Scrum meetings, I'm in the design discussions, and you know, I'm trying to get involved in API syntax reviews and trying to give feedback in terms of, oh, well, this doesn't make sense, or it's so, you know, it can be a lot simpler. Syntax, the response can be shorter, or, you know, we talked about the long request and response bodies. A lot of those can actually be a lot simpler. But if the developers, you know, sometimes they just spread out APIs, you know, they're under like strict past deadlines. We don't have time to really think about the design of the API. But if they have the customer, so I'm kind of an advocate for the customer users. If I get involved up front, then there's less documentation that I have to write, and it's that process becomes a lot simpler. You know, I just worry about stuff like the stuff that I talked about.
Yeah. You know, I totally, that's a great point that you brought up. Like, when you start to document these endpoints, you do see the inconsistencies. I remember documenting an API and realizing that some of the parameters were in full caps, others were in lowercase, others were in camel case. And I was like, hey, can we be consistent here? And they gave me some long explanation about how, oh, this is Java, and in enums you full cap this, and that's why it's that. And I was like, well, look, it looks inconsistent, whatever the code base is. What the industry leaders claim to be the solution to this is to, at least this is a book by Michael Stowe on spec-driven development. He says what you do is, before developers start coding away and building the API, you define the spec, like the RAML spec or the Swagger spec, that shows a mock of how it's going to work. It's not going to actually be coded, so it won't really work, but it will show the user what the various endpoints are, the parameters, and they'll get a sense of how it will work. And when you get people to agree with that, then you tell the developers to go to work and build that, and the spec becomes the contract. I've never actually worked in a place like that, so I don't really know if that truly works. But yeah, you know, in agile development workshops, things happen so quickly, and there's no time to like influence a lot of the design because it happens in meetings that we're not even part of. And people have takeaways from conversations to build certain things without clear requirements, and then by the time it bubbles down to the tech writer, it's like, holy crap, this is the way this is. You know, can we fix it? And you're like, oh no, you'd have to recode everything, and you push us out a month, and it's like, you miss that window when you could have changed something, right? So I don't really have a great solution. If you can adopt the spec as a contract model, great. And if you can get in early, like you're saying, great. That's awesome. Sometimes getting in really early just tends to burn me out with too many meetings where I'm a fly on the wall without any influence, you know. So it's hard to balance, you know, all of that.
It's hard because you know, there's this perception about tech writers, right? Tech writers and developers, you know, especially if you're trying to provide. It's not if you're just simply trying to provide feedback or you know, oh, by the way, that sounds like, you know, they'll give you this look like, why are you telling me this? You're just a tech writer. So I run into a lot of that, but I don't give up.
Yeah,
because I will end up having to document this ugly syntax and
Yeah.
inconsistent thing.
That's a poor developer. I think we probably all run into that, but I think that's a poor developer. It's a bad attitude. I always run into agile. I mean, I'm old, right? I've been through the whole waterfall thing, and now it's agile place after agile, you know, all these software development houses. And for most of them, it's a way they shoot from the hip. They code from the hip. There's no functional specs. They're just winging it. There's a lot of them really are.
Yeah.
It depends on who your scrum master is and the product managers. And so many things come into play there, but lots of times it's just like fire away, meet deadlines.
Well, with API,
very little documentation, communication.
when they code from the hip and release a version of their API, and then they decide to change an endpoint, they've got real problems because they've got all these customers who have potentially adopted the previous one. They have to support backwards compatibility, which is twice as much work. So that's why, I mean, there's a lot of people who get burned out in agile flow, and then they're like, well, we need some kind of contract to try to avoid these disastrous errors. Yeah.
That's a great point. I think API, that's one of the things I was starting to narrow in on. I think for developers, the API matters more than just about anything. Like, from their perspective, we need release notes, and we need the API stuff to be real good, and everything else, nobody reads it, oh well. You know,
Yeah.
They don't really care, but those things they care about.
What some companies like Facebook, when they change their API and end up breaking a bunch of client applications, really anger developers who've like, they've coded something, it worked, and now all of a sudden the company changes it, you know? So definitely, if you can influence good design, by good design, I think the API should just be predictable. Like, what is that endpoint? It should be pretty clear what it kind of returns. You know, if it's completely vague, inconsistent, hard to use, people always have to consult the docs because they can never really get the hang of it. That's poor design. So, any other questions, thoughts, issues we want to bring up? Well, if you want more information, in addition to the resources on my site, you can also check out some on Udemy by Peter Gruenbaum. He's got some video courses that are worthwhile. Yeah, Gruenbaum. I've done some reviews on my site, so if you type Peter API.course Udemy, you should find it. But they're pretty good, and Saramatics has some good materials as well. So I encourage you to make it a study, and I'd love to hear your feedback. So thanks so much.
Thank you.